In the digital age of 2026, when every corner of our world seems mapped and monitored, there emerged a collection of encounters so extraordinary that they shattered our understanding of what lurks in the remaining wild places of our planet. These are not the grainy footage and questionable footprints of decades past. These are crystal-clear testimonies from witnesses armed with modern technology, whose evidence is so compelling and terrifying that it forces us to confront an impossible truth. We are not alone, and what shares our world is far more intelligent and dangerous than we ever dared imagine. On October 3, 2019, 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez disappeared from Cascade Falls Campground in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, Washington. What started as a family camping trip turned into the most documented Bigfoot encounter in Pacific Northwest history, captured entirely on her father's GoPro camera. The footage would later reveal a truth so extraordinary that it challenges everything we thought we knew about the wilderness. Emma Rodriguez was an adventurous third grader from Bellingham, Washington, who loved exploring the outdoors with her family. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a 34-year-old park ranger who had worked in the Mount Baker area for over 8 years. Her mother, Sarah, taught elementary school and shared Miguel's passion for hiking and camping. The family made monthly trips to various locations throughout the Cascades, always choosing remote spots where Emma could safely explore and learn about nature. October 3rd was supposed to be a perfect autumn camping trip. The Rodriguez family had reserved campsite 14 at Cascade Falls, a secluded spot about 12 miles from the nearest road. Miguel had chosen this location specifically because it offered excellent hiking trails suitable for Emma's age, plus a beautiful waterfall that she had been asking to see for months. The weather forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal conditions for their planned 3-day adventure. What Miguel didn't know was that this particular area had a history of unexplained incidents. Park records, which he had never reviewed for this remote section, documented 5 missing person cases over the past 15 years. 3 involved children under the age of 12. All had occurred during the fall months, and none had ever been fully resolved. The family arrived at Cascade Falls Campground at 2:30 p.m. on October 3, 2019. Miguel's routine was always the same: set up camp first, then explore. He had mounted his GoPro Hero 7 on a chest harness that morning, planning to document their entire trip for Emma's school project about Pacific Northwest ecosystems. The camera would run continuously throughout their stay, capturing what would become the most important footage in cryptozoology history. Emma was immediately fascinated by the campground's natural features. The site sat in a clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks, with Cascade Creek running just 50 yards away. The sound of the waterfall, about a quarter-mile upstream, created a constant background noise that Emma found magical. She spent the first hour collecting interesting rocks and leaves, while Miguel and Sarah set up their tent and organized their supplies. At 4:15 p.m., the GoPro captured Emma discovering something unusual near the creek. She called out to her parents, pointing excitedly at what appeared to be a large footprint pressed into the muddy bank. Miguel, with his ranger training, immediately recognized that it was unlike any animal track he had seen in his 8 years of forest service. The print measured roughly 14 inches long and 6 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions that suggested a bipedal creature. "Dad, what kind of animal makes tracks like this?" Emma asked, her voice clearly audible on the recording. Miguel's response revealed his confusion. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. It's bigger than a bear track, but the shape is all wrong. Maybe it's just an old print that got distorted by the rain." But Emma wasn't satisfied with that explanation. Her natural curiosity, encouraged by years of family hiking trips, made her want to investigate further. The GoPro footage shows her following the creek bank, looking for more prints while her parents finished setting up camp. What she found would change everything. At 4:32 p.m., Emma discovered a series of prints leading away from the creek and into the dense forest. The tracks were fresh, pressed into soft earth that had been moistened by morning dew, but not yet dried by the afternoon sun. More importantly, they showed a clear pattern of bipedal movement with a stride length that suggested something much larger than a human, but walking upright like one. "Mom! Dad! Come look at this!" Emma's excited voice echoed through the forest. The camera captured Miguel and Sarah hurrying to join their daughter, who was kneeling beside the clearest print they had seen yet. Sarah's background in education made her naturally analytical, and she immediately began asking questions that would prove crucial later. "How deep do you think this is, Miguel?" she asked, running her finger along the edge of the impression. "And look at these toe marks. They're so detailed. This had to be made recently, maybe even today." Miguel's ranger instincts kicked in. He began documenting the prints with his phone camera while the GPORE continued recording from his chest. The footage shows him measuring the prints with a small ruler from Emma's school supplies, noting the depth, width, and spacing between tracks. His professional training was evident as he carefully avoided disturbing the evidence while gathering as much information as possible. What happened next would haunt the Rodriguez family forever. At 4:47 p.m., while Miguel and Sarah were focused on documenting the footprints, Emma wandered about 30 yards deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be a faint trail. The GoPro, still mounted on Miguel's chest, captured her small figure moving between the trees, her bright red jacket making her easy to spot against the dark forest backdrop. "Emma, don't go too far," Sarah called out, but her daughter was already partially hidden by the thick undergrowth. The camera shows Emma stopping beside a massive fallen log, examining something on the ground that had caught her attention. She appeared to be talking to herself, a habit she had when making discoveries during their family hikes. At exactly 4:52 p.m., the GoPro recorded a sound that would later be analyzed by an endless amount of audio experts around the world. A low, resonant call echoed through the forest, not quite human, but far more complex than any known animal vocalization. The sound lasted approximately 8 seconds and seemed to come from multiple directions at once, suggesting either multiple sources or sophisticated acoustic manipulation. Emma's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of showing fear, she displayed the curiosity that her parents had always encouraged. The footage shows her turning toward the sound, taking several steps in its direction. "Hello?" she called out, her young voice carrying clearly through the forest. "Is someone there?" Miguel and Sarah heard both the strange call and Emma's response. The camera captured their immediate alarm as they realized their daughter was no longer visible from their position. "Emma!" Miguel shouted, his voice tight with sudden concern. "Come back here right now." But Emma didn't respond. The GoPro footage shows Miguel and Sarah crashing through the undergrowth, calling their daughter's name repeatedly. They reached the fallen log where Emma had been standing just moments before, but she was nowhere to be seen. Her small footprints were clearly visible in the soft earth, leading toward a dense thicket of salmonberry bushes and young firs. What the camera captured next defied explanation. As Miguel pushed through the thicket, following Emma's trail, a massive dark shape moved between the trees about 50 yards ahead. The figure was upright, easily 8 feet tall, and moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Most remarkably, it appeared to be carrying something, a small bundle that could have been a child. "Sarah, do you see that?" Miguel's voice was barely a whisper, but the camera's sensitive microphone picked up every word. The footage shows him stopping abruptly, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Sarah moved up beside him, and her sharp intake of breath was clearly audible when she spotted the figure. The creature, for lack of a better term, seemed aware of their presence. It paused at the edge of a small clearing, turning slightly in their direction. The GoPro captured what appeared to be a face, though the distance and forest shadows made details difficult to discern. What was clear was the intelligence in its posture, the deliberate way it assessed the situation before continuing deeper into the forest. The figure disappeared into the dense forest, moving with surprising speed despite its size and apparent burden. Miguel and Sarah gave chase, but the thick undergrowth and uneven terrain made it impossible to keep up. The GoPro footage became chaotic, showing glimpses of trees, sky, and forest floor as Miguel struggled through the wilderness. For the next 47 minutes, the camera documented their frantic search. They called Emma's name continuously, their voices growing hoarse with desperation. They found broken branches and disturbed vegetation that suggested something large had passed through, but no sign of their daughter. As daylight began to fade, Miguel made the decision that would save their lives, but haunt them forever. "We need to get help," he told Sarah, his voice heavy with defeat. "We can't search this forest in the dark, and we need professional rescue teams." The hike back to their campsite took 23 minutes, every step captured by the still-running GoPro. The footage shows their growing desperation as they realized how vast and impenetrable the forest truly was. By the time they reached their tent, it was nearly dark, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Miguel's first call was to his supervisor at the Park Service, Ranger Captain Lisa Chen. The GoPro captured his side of the conversation, his professional training warring with his parental panic as he tried to explain what had happened. "Lisa, I need immediate search and rescue at Cascade Falls Campground. My daughter is missing, and I think something took her." Captain Chen's response was swift and professional. Within 2 hours, the first search teams arrived at the campground. The initial response included 12 rangers, 2 dog units, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The search would eventually expand to include over 60 personnel and cover more than 40 square miles of wilderness. But the most crucial evidence was already in Miguel's possession. The GoPro footage, which he initially forgot about in his panic, would provide investigators with the most detailed documentation of a Bigfoot encounter ever recorded. When he finally remembered the camera the next morning, the implications of what they had captured began to sink in. Detective Ray Morrison of the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office was assigned as the lead investigator for Emma's disappearance. A 20-year veteran with extensive experience in wilderness search and rescue, Morrison had seen his share of missing person cases. But when Miguel showed him the GoPro footage, Morrison knew he was dealing with something unprecedented. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like this," Morrison later testified. The footage clearly shows a large, bipedal creature carrying what appears to be a child. The movement patterns, the size, the apparent intelligence, it doesn't match any known animal in the Pacific Northwest. The investigation that followed was unlike any missing person case in Washington state history. Traditional search methods were combined with cryptozoology research, audio analysis, and behavioral studies. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted, though their involvement was kept confidential to avoid media sensationalism. Dr. Amanda Foster, a primatologist from the University of Washington, was brought in to analyze the creature footage. Her initial assessment was cautious but intriguing. The locomotion patterns suggest a large primate, but the size and proportions don't match any known species. The way it carries the burden, presumably the child, shows remarkable care and intelligence. Audio expert Dr. James Whitfield analyzed the vocalizations captured on the GPORO. His findings were equally puzzling. The calls demonstrate a vocal range and complexity that exceeds human capabilities while showing structured patterns that suggest intentional communication. There are harmonic frequencies that don't occur in any cataloged North American wildlife. The search for Emma continued for 2 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and professional searchers. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the forest. Ground teams with dogs covered every accessible trail and creek bed. The effort was one of the largest wilderness searches in Pacific Northwest history. On October 17th, 14 days after Emma's disappearance, hiker Jennifer Walsh made a discovery that would change everything. While exploring a remote area about 8 miles from the original campsite, she found a small clearing that showed signs of recent habitation. The site included a crude shelter made from branches and moss, a circle of stones that had been used for a fire, and most importantly, Emma's red jacket hanging from a low branch. The jacket was clean and undamaged, carefully placed as if someone had wanted it to be found. Nearby, investigators discovered more of the large footprints, along with smaller impressions that could have been made by a child's bare feet. The evidence suggested that Emma had been in this location recently, and that she had been cared for rather than harmed. But the most extraordinary discovery came from a motion-activated trail cam that Jennifer had set up in the area 6 months earlier for a wildlife photography project. The camera had captured footage from the night of October 16th, just 1 day before the jacket was found. The trail camera footage showed Emma Rodriguez, very much alive, sitting beside a small fire in the clearing. She appeared healthy and unharmed, though her clothes were dirty and her hair was tangled. Most remarkably, she was not alone. The massive figure from Miguel's GoPro footage was clearly visible, sitting across the fire from Emma, in what appeared to be a protective posture. The creature's features were more visible in the trail camera footage than they had been in the original GoPro recording. It was clearly humanoid but covered in dark, coarse hair. Its face showed intelligence and what could only be described as gentleness as it watched Emma. The footage captured the creature offering Emma what appeared to be berries and roots, which she accepted and ate without fear. Perhaps most incredible was the apparent communication between Emma and her captor. The audio captured Emma talking to the creature in her normal voice, as if having a conversation with a friend. While the creature's responses were not in any recognizable language, they showed clear patterns and seemed to be direct replies to Emma's comments. "I miss my mom and dad." Emma's voice was clearly audible on the recording. "When can I go home?" The creature's response was a series of low, melodic sounds that seemed almost mournful. It reached out with one massive hand and gently touched Emma's shoulder in what appeared to be a comforting gesture. The trail camera footage ran for 37 minutes before the subjects moved out of frame. The final images showed the creature carefully banking the fire and leading Emma deeper into the forest, its hand protectively on her shoulder. This discovery prompted an immediate expansion of the search effort. The area around Jennifer's clearing became the focus of intensive investigation, with teams of searchers combing every square foot of the surrounding forest. But despite their efforts, no further trace of Emma or her mysterious companion was found. The case took another dramatic turn on October 23rd when Emma Rodriguez walked out of the forest on her own. She appeared at the Cascade Falls trailhead at approximately 6:30 a.m., dirty and tired, but otherwise unharmed. Hikers who found her described her as calm and coherent, asking only to see her parents. Emma's reunion with Miguel and Sarah was captured by news cameras that had been maintaining a vigil at the search headquarters. The footage shows a healthy, alert child who seemed remarkably untraumatized by her 3-week ordeal in the wilderness. Her first words to her parents were, "I'm okay. He took good care of me." The medical examination that followed found Emma to be in surprisingly good health. She had lost some weight and showed signs of exposure to the elements, but had no injuries or indications of abuse. Most remarkably, she had somehow avoided the hypothermia and dehydration that would normally be expected after 3 weeks in the wilderness. Emma's account of her experience was both fascinating and troubling. She described being carried through the forest by what she called the big man, who had taken her to a safe place where she wouldn't get lost. According to Emma, the creature had provided her with food, water, and shelter, protecting her from the cold and rain. "He was really nice," Emma told investigators. "He couldn't talk like us, but he understood when I was scared or hungry. He showed me which berries were safe to eat and how to stay warm at night. He missed his family too." Child psychologist Dr. Maria Santos, who conducted extensive interviews with Emma, found no evidence of trauma or fabrication. Emma's account is remarkably consistent and detailed. She shows no signs of the psychological distress typically associated with abduction or abuse. Her descriptions of the creature's behavior suggest a level of care and protection that's difficult to explain. Perhaps most intriguing were Emma's drawings of her experience. Her artwork showed detailed depictions of the creature, the forest shelters where they stayed, and various scenes from their time together. The drawings matched the physical evidence found at the campsites and corroborated details from the trail camera footage. Emma also provided information that led to the discovery of 2 additional campsites where she and the creature had stayed during her time in the forest. Both sites showed the same careful construction and evidence of fire use, along with more of the large footprints. The sites were connected by what appeared to be a network of trails known only to the creature. The scientific community's response to Emma's case was divided but intense. Cryptozoologists hailed it as definitive proof of Bigfoot's existence, pointing to the multiple forms of evidence: video footage, audio recordings, physical tracks, and eyewitness testimony from a credible source. Skeptics argued that the case, while extraordinary, still fell short of the scientific proof required to confirm a new species. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University and a leading Bigfoot researcher, analyzed all the available evidence. His conclusion was cautiously optimistic. The Rodriguez case presents the most compelling collection of evidence for the existence of a large, unknown primate in North America. The combination of video documentation, physical evidence, and witness testimony creates a picture that is difficult to dismiss through conventional explanations. The physical evidence collected during Emma's disappearance underwent extensive scientific analysis. Hair samples found at the campsites were examined by Dr. Melba Ketchum's laboratory in Texas, known for its work on cryptid DNA analysis. The results were inconclusive but intriguing. The samples showed primate characteristics but didn't match any known species in genetic databases. Plaster casts of the footprints revealed dermal ridges and anatomical details that would be nearly impossible to fake. The prints showed wear patterns consistent with a creature that walked primarily on forest terrain, with calloused areas that suggested a lifetime of barefoot travel through rough wilderness. The audio analysis proved equally compelling. Dr. Scott Nelson, a former Navy cryptologic linguist, studied the vocalizations captured on both Miguel's GoPro and the trail camera. His findings suggested a complex communication system with consistent phonetic patterns that resembled language structure. "What we're hearing isn't random animal sounds," Dr. Nelson explained. "There are repeated phonemes, tonal variations that suggest meaning, and response patterns that indicate genuine communication. This creature appears to have a sophisticated vocal language." Emma's case also revealed a disturbing pattern of similar incidents throughout the Pacific Northwest. Research conducted by the Olympic Project, a Bigfoot investigation organization, uncovered 17 cases of missing children in Washington and Oregon over the past 30 years. In 12 of these cases, the children were found alive after several days, often with stories of being cared for by a big, hairy man in the forest. Most of these earlier cases had been dismissed as childhood fantasy or trauma-induced false memories. But Emma's case, with its extensive documentation, forced investigators to reconsider these previous incidents. Patterns emerged that were too consistent to ignore. Children between ages 6 and 10, disappearances during fall months, recovery after 3 to 7 days, and remarkably similar descriptions of their caretaker. The Rodriguez family's life changed dramatically after Emma's return. Miguel took extended leave from his ranger position, struggling to reconcile his scientific training with what he had witnessed. Sarah left her teaching job to focus on Emma's recovery and to research similar cases. The family moved to a smaller town away from the media attention, seeking privacy to process their extraordinary experience. Emma herself seemed remarkably well adjusted, though she occasionally spoke about missing her friend in the forest. Child psychologists noted that she showed none of the typical signs of trauma associated with abduction cases. Instead, she displayed increased confidence and a deeper connection to nature that surprised her parents. "She's different now," Sarah explained to investigators. "More mature, more aware of the natural world around her. It's like she learned something out there that most people never get to experience." The case attracted international attention from researchers, media outlets, and cryptozoology enthusiasts. The Rodriguez family received thousands of letters from people sharing their own encounters with similar creatures. Many of these accounts had never been reported to authorities, their witnesses fearing ridicule or disbelief. Dr. Grover Krantz's research archives at Washington State University became a focal point for analyzing these reports. Patterns emerged showing a concentration of sightings in the same general area where Emma disappeared, suggesting a stable population of these creatures in the remote wilderness of the North Cascades. The Native American perspective added crucial context to Emma's case. Elder Joseph Moses of the Lummi Nation explained that his people had always known about the Stick Indians, forest beings who occasionally interacted with humans, particularly children. According to tribal tradition, these encounters were not to be feared, but respected as connections to the ancient wisdom of the forest. "The old stories tell us that sometimes the forest people take care of lost children," Moses shared. "They return them when it's safe, when they've learned what they needed to learn." Your daughter was chosen for something special. The investigation officially concluded 6 months after Emma's return, with the case classified as resolved but unexplained. Detective Morrison's final report acknowledged that while Emma had been safely returned, the circumstances of her disappearance and care remained beyond conventional explanation. The physical evidence was preserved in a special collection at the University of Washington, available for future research. The GoPro footage and trail camera recordings were digitally archived and made available to qualified researchers worldwide. Emma's case sparked changes in how missing person investigations are conducted in wilderness areas. Search protocols now include consultation with cryptozoology researchers and Native American tribal authorities. Trail cameras are deployed more extensively, and unusual evidence is preserved rather than dismissed. 5 years later, Emma Rodriguez is now 13 years old and thriving in her new community. She has become an advocate for wilderness conservation and frequently speaks about the importance of respecting unknown species that may share our forests. Her experience has inspired a new generation of researchers dedicated to understanding the mysteries that still exist in our world. The Rodriguez family established the Emma Rodriguez Foundation for Wilderness Research, which funds scientific investigation of unexplained phenomena in natural settings. The foundation has supported dozens of research projects and maintains a database of similar encounters reported throughout North America. Miguel returned to ranger work, but in a different capacity, serving as a liaison between park services and cryptozoology researchers. His experience has helped bridge the gap between traditional wildlife management and the investigation of unknown species. The creature that cared for Emma has never been seen again, despite extensive monitoring of the area where she was found. Motion-activated cameras continue to operate throughout the region, and researchers maintain hope that additional evidence will emerge. Emma's case remains one of the most documented and credible Bigfoot encounters in history. The combination of video evidence, physical traces, and credible witness testimony has convinced many skeptics that something extraordinary exists in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Whether that something is a surviving population of ancient primates, an unknown species of human relative, or something else entirely, remains to be determined. But Emma Rodriguez's 3 weeks in the forest proved that our world still holds mysteries that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The truth about what happened to 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez may never be fully understood, but her safe return and the evidence of her care by an unknown forest dweller suggests that sometimes, in the deepest wilderness, we are not as alone as we think. And sometimes that's not something to fear, but something to wonder about. On September 15, 2018, search teams found Cecilia Mangrove's empty campsite in Olympic National Forest, Washington. She was a scientist who had left 3 days earlier, but her broken phone and camera gear hinted she'd encountered something unusual in the wilderness, sparking the most mysterious disappearance in the Pacific Northwest.
It's an elusive creature.
Cecilia, a 29-year-old environmental scientist and avid hiker from Portland, Oregon, set out on September 11, 2018. She packed her gear for what should have been a routine 3-day expedition. The destination was Whisper Creek Trail in Olympic National Forest, a place so isolated that park rangers joked it saw more bears than hikers. But that's exactly what made it perfect for Cecilia's research on old-growth forest recovery. What she didn't realize was just how far from civilization she was traveling, or that this remote stretch of forest, rarely visited by humans, might be hiding something extraordinary, something out of legend, something the locals whispered about but few had ever seen, and something they called Bigfoot. What her family didn't know was that Cecilia had spent that day methodically documenting the forest. Between 6 and 8 p.m. on September 11th, she took over 100 photos, far more than her usual evening routine. As an environmental scientist studying forest recovery, she typically photographed tree formations and growth patterns. But that evening was different. Her camera focused on areas where vegetation grew unusually thick and trees had strange, irregular shapes. Her research journal, found later at the campsite, revealed why. Detailed notes described strange wildlife signs and unusual disturbances in the forest floor. The final entry, dated September 11th at 10:30 p.m., described something large that had recently moved through the area, broken branches 8 feet high and unusual track marks near the creek. She planned to investigate further the next day. The weather stayed perfect throughout the night, with clear skies and calm winds. According to weather data, conditions were ideal for the wildlife watching and photography work that Cecilia had planned for the next day. Nothing in the weather suggested any reason to worry about her safety or the success of her trip. September 12, 2018, started like any other day for people waiting to hear from Cecilia Mangrove. According to the detailed plan she had submitted to both her employer and the Olympic National Forest Ranger Station, she was supposed to pack up camp early and hike the remaining 4 miles to Summit Lake, where she planned to set up her main research base. No one expected to hear from her during this day, since the deeper wilderness areas of Whisper Creek Trail had no cell phone coverage. Cecilia had noted this in her planning documents and had also informed both her brother Marcus and her boss. Her satellite communication device, a Garmin InReach Explorer that she carried on all solo trips, was set to send automatic location signals every 4 hours during daylight. The device sent its final signal at 6:18 a.m. on September 12th, showing her position at the campsite where she had spent the night. After that time, the device went completely silent. This was unusual, but not immediately scary, since satellite coverage could be spotty in the thick forest of the Olympic Peninsula. September 13th was the day Cecilia was supposed to come back. Her plan said she would pack up camp at Summit Lake by 8 a.m. and hike back to the trailhead, getting there by 4 p.m. Marcus Mangrove had arranged to meet her for dinner in Portland that evening, something they always did after each of her major solo trips. When 6 p.m. came and went without a word from his sister, Marcus started calling her cell phone. All calls went straight to voicemail. At first, Marcus wasn't too worried. Cecilia had been late coming back from hikes before, usually because she found something interesting to research, or the trail was harder than expected. She was careful about safety, but also passionate about her work, and he knew she might stay longer if she discovered something scientifically important. However, as the evening went on and his calls kept going unanswered, he started to worry more. By 10 p.m. on September 13th, Marcus had left 12 voicemails and sent many text messages. He also checked Cecilia's Instagram account, hoping to see a post explaining why she was late, but her last update was still the campfire photo from September 11th. This was very unusual. Cecilia usually posted daily during her trips, and she had never gone more than 24 hours without some form of communication during a solo hike. September 14th brought more worry. Cecilia was scheduled for a 9 a.m. conference call with her research team at work, something she had never missed. When she didn't join the call, her supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, immediately contacted Marcus. By noon, both Marcus and Dr. Walsh had driven to the Whisper Creek trailhead, where they found Cecilia's Honda CR-V exactly where she had parked it 3 days earlier. The car was locked and undisturbed. Her spare key, which she always hid in a magnetic case under the rear bumper, was still there. Inside the car, they found her purse, wallet, and a detailed backup copy of her research notes, things she never would have left behind if she had returned safely. Most concerning was finding her emergency contact card on the dashboard, which listed Marcus's phone number and included specific instructions about when to contact authorities if she failed to return. At 2:47 p.m. on September 14th, Marcus called the Olympic National Forest Ranger Station to report his sister missing. Ranger Elena Vasquez, who had processed Cecilia's backcountry permit, immediately understood how serious the situation was. Cecilia was known to park staff as an experienced and reliable hiker who always followed safety rules. Her failure to return as scheduled was completely unlike her. The first response was quick but limited. 2 park rangers hiked the first 3 miles of Whisper Creek Trail that afternoon, calling Cecilia's name and looking for any signs of her. They found nothing unusual on the main trail and returned to organize a bigger search effort for the next day. September 15th marked the beginning of the official search and rescue operation. At dawn, a team of 12 searchers, including park rangers, volunteer search and rescue people, and a dog unit, entered the Whisper Creek Trail. The search team had GPS devices, emergency medical supplies, and communication equipment to coordinate their efforts across the challenging terrain. The most important breakthrough in Cecilia Mangrove's disappearance came from finding her iPhone 8, discovered by search and rescue teams 50 yards downstream from her abandoned campsite. The device was lodged partly underwater in Whisper Creek, trapped between 2 rocks in shallow water. Despite significant water damage and a badly cracked screen, crime lab technicians were able to recover much of the phone's data, though some files were partially corrupted. What they could reconstruct revealed a chilling sequence of events that appeared to occur in the early morning hours of September 12, 2018. According to the phone's metadata, Cecilia's final photo sequence began at exactly 6:23 a.m. The first image was deceptively ordinary, a golden sunrise streaming through the trees, captured from inside her tent. The composition suggested she had woken naturally, starting her day with routine environmental documentation, photographing the forest floor and light patterns. The photo was calm, almost serene, masking the ominous events about to unfold. 2 minutes later, at 6:25 a.m., the second photo marked a dramatic shift. Cecilia had intentionally focused on a massive footprint pressed deep into the muddy ground beside Whisper Creek. Analysis revealed the print measured approximately 18.5 inches long and 7.2 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions and a skin-like texture along the pads. The depth suggested the creature weighed far more than any known wildlife in the Olympic Peninsula. It was unlike a bear, elk or human, and the freshness of the imprint suggested it had been made while she slept in her tent just yards away. At 6:28 a.m., Cecilia's third photo captured the tree line about 30 yards from her campsite. At first glance, it seemed like a routine forest shot, but digital enhancement revealed a dark, upright silhouette partially hidden among the evergreen branches. The figure appeared unusually tall, roughly 8 feet, and moved in a way that didn't match any known animal in the region. Judging by the angle and framing, Cecilia seemed to have paused briefly, adjusting her camera to capture the figure without drawing attention. Leaves rustled beneath it, branches snapped softly, and a shadow swept across the clearing. Even through her scientific lens, the scene was extraordinary, unsettling, and completely unexpected. The fourth photo, taken at 6:31 a.m., showed Cecilia's face, wide-eyed and tense, her mouth slightly open as if holding her breath. Reflections in her eyes hinted at movement in the tree line, though the background remained blurry. The image captured both her terror and the realization that she was witnessing something extraordinary, something unlike any known wildlife. At 6:34 a.m., Cecilia's phone recorded a 47-second audio clip that sent chills through forensic analysts. Her whispering voice, punctuated by shallow, rapid breaths, indicated panic but also intentional documentation. Overlapping her voice were the sounds of footsteps on leaves, snapping twigs, and a low, guttural noise. The tonal quality of the sound was unlike any known mammal or bird call in the region. Midway through the clip, Cecilia's voice surged, narrating rapidly and carefully, noting movement, proximity, and behaviors of whatever she had encountered. Then, abruptly, a loud crack, a tree branch breaking under massive weight, ended the recording, followed by static. The phone likely dropped or was damaged in the scramble that followed. Between 6:25 and 6:36 a.m., her camera, audio and drafts, revealed an escalating encounter. She typed 2 urgent messages she never sent. One to her brother, Marcus, instructing him to check the photos if anything happened, and one to her supervisor, explaining she had discovered something extraordinary that could revolutionize her ecological reports. The unsent messages implied that Cecilia's observation window had been brief, minutes, possibly seconds, before her situation became dire. During the early part of this period, her recordings and notes captured a mix of careful scientific observation and growing alarm. Every detail, the massive footprint, the distant silhouette in the tree line, and the unusual guttural sounds, was documented meticulously, highlighting her instinct to record what she was witnessing even as the encounter intensified. The GPS data from her phone painted a frantic picture. After the 6:31 a.m. photo, the device tracked rapid movement away from the campsite, approximately 200 yards in under 3 minutes. Her path was erratic, sudden stops, abrupt changes in direction, and repeated backtracking, suggesting she was moving to both observe and evade. Disturbed brush and broken branches along the route supported the theory that a large creature had been moving near her, if not following her. Enhancing the audio from the camera, experts noted a sequence of steps heavier than a human's, but lighter than a large bear, interspersed with the guttural noises. The sound suggested deliberate observation. The creature was close enough to leave detailed prints, but not immediately visible to her. Cecilia's whispers reveal her scientific instincts kicking in. She notes movement, branch position, and sound direction, documenting the phenomenon while experiencing primal fear. By 6:36 a.m., the situation escalated. Cecilia's satellite communicator attempted to send an SOS via her Garmin InReach Explorer. Only a fragmented message with GPS coordinates was transmitted before the device failed, likely due to damage or environmental interference. This last transmission, combined with the GPS, camera, and audio data, indicated that Cecilia encountered a massive, intelligent, and mobile presence in the forest, one she had been observing intentionally but could not fully escape or communicate about. The investigation into Cecilia Mangrove's disappearance suggests she may not have been entirely alone in the Whisper Creek area during her final expedition. Jake Morrison, a 34-year-old software developer from Tacoma, had been camping about 2 miles north of Cecilia's location on the night of September 11–12, 2018. An experienced backpacker with over 15 years of wilderness experience, Morrison shared a troubling account that aligns loosely with the timeline from Cecilia's digital evidence, hinting that someone, or something, may have been in the area at the same time. Morrison told investigators he woke at 6:30 a.m. on September 12th to a chilling 10-second howl from Whisper Creek, unlike anything he'd heard in his years outdoors. When he returned from checking the area, his campsite was unnervingly tidy, yet altered. Water bottles neatly by the fire ring, boots moved and aligned. Nothing was stolen or damaged, leaving him convinced it was deliberate, too organized to be wildlife mischief. Park Ranger Elena Vasquez, who had worked in Olympic National Forest for 15 years, provided crucial context about the unusual evidence found at Cecilia's campsite. In her decade and a half of investigating wildlife encounters and missing person cases, she said the prints were unlike anything she had documented before. They were larger than bear tracks, wrong shape for humans, and the stride length was unusually long, suggesting something that walked upright. Vasquez's testimony revealed a pattern of unusual incidents in the Whisper Creek area that had been quietly logged but not widely publicized. Over the previous 5 years, 3 separate hikers had reported disturbing encounters in the same region where Cecilia disappeared. Park officials had categorized these as unexplained incidents, but chose not to release them broadly, concerned it might discourage visitors or fuel speculation about the forest. The first incident occurred in September 2014, when a married couple hiked a remote stretch of the Whisper Creek Trail and reported feeling as though they were being followed. For over 2 miles, they heard snapping branches and low, indistinct noises that seemed to come from all around. Shadows shifted at the edges of their vision, disappearing whenever they tried to focus directly on them. By the time they reached the trailhead, they were shaken, convinced that something unusually large had been moving through the forest near them. The second incident occurred in October 2016, when a solo hiker reported several blurry photographs showing a large, upright figure moving among the dense evergreens. The images were grainy, but the shape appeared unusually tall, with movements that seemed deliberate and disturbingly human-like. The hiker also recalled hearing heavy footfalls nearby, and low, resonant sounds that seemed to come from different directions within the forest, though it was impossible to pinpoint their source. The third encounter occurred just 8 months before Cecilia's disappearance. A group of college students camping in the area awoke to find their site disturbed, in a way reminiscent of Jake Morrison's later report. Tents were partially torn, supplies had been moved, and unusually large footprints, estimated at around 6 feet in length, were pressed into the soft ground surrounding the camp. Initially, they assumed a bear had wandered through, but the size and spacing of the prints suggested deliberate movement. Some of the students reported catching brief glimpses of a dark, hulking figure at the edge of the tree line, disappearing whenever they looked directly. Perhaps the most significant testimony came from Thomas Clearwater, a 73-year-old Quinault elder, explained to investigators that his people had always considered the Whisper Creek area both sacred and dangerous. According to tribal stories, the forest doesn't take kindly to those who try to take more than they should. Tribal records passed down through generations documented 7 unexplained disappearances in that area over the past century, with most happening in early fall when the forest is said to be most protective. In the weeks following Cecilia Mangrove's disappearance, investigators developed 4 main theories to explain what happened during her final hours in the Olympic wilderness. Each theory was carefully examined against the available evidence, but none of the conventional explanations could adequately account for all the disturbing details recovered from the scene. Investigators looked at several possible explanations for what happened to Cecilia. At first, a wildlife attack seemed most likely. The Olympic Peninsula has black bears and mountain lions that can attack people. Claw marks on her tent and the disturbed campsite suggested a large predator had been there. But this idea fell apart when they looked closer. There was no blood at the scene, despite signs of violence. Even stranger, Cecilia's belongings were carefully arranged, her boots placed neatly together, her camera equipment secured in waterproof bags, and her phone positioned in the creek rather than scattered around. Large predators don't organize things this way. Some thought a human predator might have followed Cecilia's social media posts and tracked her down. This would explain why her belongings were deliberately arranged instead of randomly destroyed. But the massive 18-inch footprints around the campsite were way too big for any human. Audio specialists said the recorded sounds didn't match anything humans or known wildlife could make. Plus, the remote location and difficult terrain made it unlikely a stalker could reach the area without leaving their own evidence trail. Another possibility was that Cecilia had an accident. Maybe she fell into Whisper Creek, got hypothermia, or injured, and became confused before dying from exposure. Finding her phone in the water seemed to support this idea at first. But her photos and audio recordings clearly showed she was alert and actively documenting something extraordinary in her final moments. Her pictures were well composed and focused, not the confused work of someone suffering from injury or exposure. Despite searching over 50 square miles, no trace of her body was ever found, though investigators noted that dense terrain can hide remains for years. The most controversial explanation for Cecilia Mangrove's disappearance was a Bigfoot encounter. The evidence was striking. Massive footprints with unusual ridge-like textures, audio recordings of unidentified sounds, coarse hair samples that defied DNA analysis, and a historical pattern of similar sightings in the region. Cecilia's final photos and audio suggested she had come face-to-face with something that both terrified and fascinated her, something she deemed important enough to document despite the risk. Her behavior mirrored reports from other Pacific Northwest Bigfoot encounters, where witnesses often described simultaneous fear and scientific curiosity. The convergence of physical evidence, witness accounts, and regional precedent made the cryptid theory difficult to dismiss. Skeptics argued that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, but supporters pointed to Cecilia's meticulous documentation as exactly that proof that could have reshaped understanding of the phenomenon had she survived to share it. Analysis of Cecilia's phone, GPS, photos, and audio revealed a clear sequence of events. First, the massive footprint, then a distant silhouette in the tree line, followed by direct auditory interaction, and finally her frantic movements as captured by GPS. Each stage escalated both tension and danger for Cecilia and for investigators reconstructing the encounter. The combination of her careful scientific documentation and the terrifying reality of an unseen, massive presence makes this one of the most compelling modern Bigfoot cases on record. The Olympic Peninsula has long been a hotspot for cryptid activity, with more than 200 documented Bigfoot sightings since the 1950s. What made Cecilia's case particularly significant was how her findings fit into this larger pattern, adding weight to a decades-long series of mysterious encounters. Environmental factors further strengthened the plausibility of her observations. Whisper Creek Trail is remote, with dense undergrowth, fallen logs, and uneven terrain. Sounds carry differently in thick forests, and shadows can conceal movement. For a trained environmental scientist like Cecilia, the combination of unusual footprints, auditory anomalies, and visual evidence made the encounter strikingly credible. In the 2 years before Cecilia's disappearance, the Olympic National Forest received 12 reports of unusual encounters within a 20-mile radius of Whisper Creek. Witnesses described consistent signs, massive footprints, strange sounds, a feeling of being watched, and behavior suggesting intelligence beyond normal wildlife. Park officials largely kept these reports confidential to prevent panic and protect tourism. But Cecilia's case brought them into the public record. What investigators discovered about Cecilia's preparation for the trip added another layer to the mystery. Her browser history revealed extensive research into local cryptid reports in the weeks leading up to her expedition. As part of her work on old-growth forest recovery, Cecilia had been studying the effects of wildlife on forest ecosystems, and she noted that many cryptid reports mentioned undisturbed areas and unusual animal activity. She had visited forums dedicated to Bigfoot Encounters, downloaded academic papers about primate behavior, and bookmarked articles specifically about the Olympic Peninsula's history of unexplained sightings. This wasn't casual curiosity. Cecilia appeared to be approaching the search methodically, using her ecological research as a framework for documenting and potentially verifying an extraordinary presence. Dr. Sarah Marvis, a primatologist at the University of Washington, provided crucial expert analysis of the audio evidence recovered from Cecilia's phone. After studying the 47-second recording, Dr. Marvis concluded that the sounds contained acoustic properties unlike any known North American wildlife. The sounds demonstrated a vocal range and resonance that exceeded human capabilities while showing structured patterns that suggested intelligence and intentional communication. The physical evidence was equally compelling. Plaster casts of the footprints around Cecilia's campsite showed detailed textures along the pads and toes, suggesting they were made by a living creature rather than a carved hoax. The stride length, over 6 feet, indicated bipedal movement by a creature significantly larger than any known primate species. Perhaps most intriguing was the behavioral evidence. The careful arrangement of Cecilia's belongings, the organized disturbance of Jake Morrison's campsite, and the historical pattern of similar encounters suggested intelligence and possibly even curiosity about human activities. This aligned with indigenous accounts of forest guardians who observed and interacted with humans in complex ways. The Olympic Peninsula's dense forests, abundant wildlife, and minimal human traffic provide ideal conditions for a large, elusive species to remain hidden. What set Cecilia's case apart was her meticulous documentation and scientific expertise. She captured fleeting evidence that had eluded countless others: subtle movements in the shadows, sounds with unusual patterns, and hints of an unseen observer. The tragedy was that her encounter ended with her disappearance, leaving these discoveries as clues without resolution. Even so, her findings remain controversial. In the scientific community and among the public, many dismiss the case as folklore or suggest Cecilia may have fabricated the clues. Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest have long been part of local legend, and skeptics argue that extraordinary claims require far more verifiable proof. Yet whispers persist. Hikers near Whisper Creek occasionally discover strange footprints, fresh disturbances, or fleeting glimpses of dark shapes at the edge of vision. Some report hearing low, resonant calls in the early morning mist, eerily similar to those captured on Cecilia's recordings. The forest seems to guard its secrets carefully, revealing just enough to intrigue the curious and unsettle the skeptical. Her disappearance remains one of the most puzzling unsolved cases in Pacific Northwest history. The official investigation, led by the Olympic National Forest Service and Washington State Police, covered over 50 square miles during an intensive 6-day search operation. Despite using helicopters, dog units, and dozens of experienced searchers, no trace of Cecilia's body was ever recovered. The case officially remains classified as a missing person investigation, though most investigators privately acknowledge that Cecilia is presumed dead. Her disappearance prompted significant changes in backcountry safety protocols, with park authorities now strongly recommending GPS tracking devices for solo hikers and requiring communication gear for researchers operating under official permits. Marcus has never stopped searching for his sister. He established a foundation dedicated to wilderness safety, which provides emergency communication equipment to researchers and maintains a database of unexplained wilderness encounters. Marcus continues to organize annual search expeditions, though he admits his focus has shifted from finding Cecilia to understanding what happened to her. 2 weeks after her disappearance, hiker David Chen discovered a cedar tree carving 3 miles deeper into the wilderness than any official search had reached. It showed the initials CM, followed by the words, "They're real," and tell the world, with an arrow pointing farther into the forest. Handwriting analysis strongly suggested Cecilia carved it, prompting an additional search in the surrounding area. No further evidence was ever recovered. This discovery raised more questions than it answered. Had Cecilia followed something into the forest? Was she trying to gather more evidence? Or had she been taken somewhere beyond the reach of conventional search efforts? The ultimate question remains. Did Cecilia Mangrove make the greatest scientific discovery of the 21st century, only to pay the ultimate price for her curiosity? Her case continues to inspire researchers, cryptozoologists, and adventurers who believe that somewhere in the vast Olympic wilderness, the truth about her final days is still waiting to be discovered. On September 15, 2021, 26-year-old Jake Morrison set out on what should have been a routine solo backpacking trip through the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. An experienced hiker from Portland, Oregon, Jake had been exploring the Pacific Northwest wilderness for over 8 years, documenting his adventures on his popular YouTube channel, Trail Tales with Jake. What began as a 5-day journey to film content for his 1,000 subscribers would become the most terrifying experience of his life and provide some of the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever captured on camera. Jake Morrison wasn't your typical weekend warrior. As a freelance outdoor photographer and content creator, he spent nearly half the year in the wilderness, often alone for weeks at a time. His apartment in Portland was more like a gear storage facility, packed with cameras, camping equipment, and maps of remote trails throughout Oregon and Washington. Friends often joked that Jake was more comfortable sleeping under the stars than in his own bed, and they weren't wrong. The Olympic Peninsula had always held a special fascination for Jake. Its vast expanses of old-growth forest, rugged coastline, and minimal human presence made it perfect for the kind of immersive wilderness content his audience craved. He had hiked sections of the peninsula before, but never attempted the remote Quinault River Trail system that would be his destination for this September trip. Jake's plan was ambitious, but well within his capabilities. He intended to hike 37 miles over 5 days, following the Quinault River deep into the heart of the Olympic wilderness. The trail would take him through some of the most pristine temperate rainforest in North America, past ancient cedar groves and hidden waterfalls that few people ever see. His goal was to document the changing seasons and capture the ethereal beauty of the Pacific Northwest autumn. What Jake didn't know was that the Quinault River Valley had a long history of unexplained encounters. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Quinault Nation, had stories going back generations about the Siatko, large, hairy beings that lived deep in the forest and occasionally revealed themselves to humans. More recently, the area had generated dozens of Bigfoot sighting reports, though most were dismissed by authorities as misidentifications or hoaxes. Jake arrived at the Graves Creek trailhead at 7:30 a.m. on September 15, 2021. The parking area was empty except for one other vehicle, unusual for a Wednesday morning, but not uncommon for such a remote location. He spent 20 minutes organizing his gear and checking his camera equipment, including the GoPro Hero 9 mounted on his chest harness and a handheld Sony A7R4 for still photography. His pack weighed 42 pounds, loaded with 5 days of food, camping gear, and enough camera equipment to document every aspect of his journey. Jake had learned from years of solo hiking that preparation was everything. He carried emergency communication devices, water purification tablets, and enough backup batteries to keep his cameras running for a week. The first day of hiking was exactly what Jake had hoped for. The Quinault River Trail wound through cathedral-like groves of Douglas fir and western red cedar, some over 800 years old. His chest-mounted GoPro captured the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy while he provided commentary for his future video. Jake's voice was clear on the recording as he paused beside a massive cedar, explaining how you could hike for hours without seeing another person, experiencing just yourself and the forest the way it had been for thousands of years. By 4:15 p.m., Jake had covered 8 miles and reached his planned campsite beside Pony Creek. The location was perfect, a small clearing with access to fresh water and enough flat ground for his ultralight tent. As was his routine, Jake spent the first hour setting up camp and organizing his gear before beginning his evening photography session. It was during this golden hour shoot that Jake first noticed something unusual. While reviewing photos on his camera's LCD screen, he spotted what appeared to be a large, dark shape in the background of several images. The shape was partially obscured by trees and could have been a stump or shadow, but something about it bothered him. Jake muttered to himself about how weird it was, zooming in on the image. The shape seemed too tall and narrow to be a stump, and it appeared in 3 consecutive photos taken from slightly different angles. More puzzling, Jake couldn't remember seeing anything that large when he was composing the shots. As darkness fell, Jake prepared dinner on his lightweight camp stove while his cameras continued recording. He had developed a habit of keeping at least one camera running throughout his trips, partly for content, but mostly for safety. If something happened to him, the footage might help rescuers understand what went wrong. At 9:23 p.m., while Jake was cleaning his cooking gear, his GoPro captured a sound that would haunt him for months afterward. A low, resonant call echoed through the forest, not quite human, but far more complex than any animal vocalization he had heard in 8 years of wilderness camping. The sound lasted about 6 seconds and seemed to come from the direction where he had noticed the strange shape in his photographs. Jake's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of fear, his first instinct was curiosity, the same trait that had driven him to spend his life exploring remote places. He grabbed his headlamp and Sony camera, switching to video mode as he moved toward the edge of his campsite. He whispered to his camera that he had never heard anything like that before, describing how it sounded almost intelligent. For the next 20 minutes, Jake waited at the edge of his campsite, camera ready, listening for any repeat of the strange call. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no small animals moving through the underbrush, nothing. Even the constant sound of Pony Creek seemed muted, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. Jake eventually returned to his tent, but sleep came fitfully. His cameras continued recording throughout the night, capturing several more instances of the mysterious calls. Audio analysis would later reveal that the vocalizations came from multiple directions, suggesting either several creatures or one that was moving around Jake's campsite in a wide circle. Morning brought relief and renewed curiosity. Jake's first task was to review the night's footage, and what he found made his hands shake as he held the camera. At 2:47 a.m., his tent-mounted GoPro had captured a clear image of something moving past his campsite. The figure was upright, easily 7 feet tall, and covered in dark hair. Most remarkably, it moved with deliberate stealth, carefully placing each step to avoid making noise. Jake could barely breathe as he replayed the footage multiple times, realizing that this was actually happening. The creature had passed within 30 feet of Jake's tent, close enough that the camera's night vision mode captured remarkable detail. The figure's proportions were clearly humanoid, but massively built, with arms that hung nearly to its knees and a distinctive sagittal crest visible on top of its head. Most unsettling was the intelligence evident in its movement. This was not a mindless animal, but something that understood it was being watched. Jake's second day of hiking began with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Part of him wanted to pack up and hike out immediately, but his photographer's instincts and natural curiosity won out. He had potentially captured footage of one of the world's most elusive creatures. He couldn't just walk away. The trail on day 2 led deeper into the wilderness, following the Quinaulta River through increasingly dense forest. Jake's pace was slower than usual as he constantly scanned the trees around him, camera ready for any sign of his mysterious visitor. His commentary became more subdued, reflecting his growing awareness that he was no longer alone in the forest. At 11:30 a.m., while crossing a small tributary creek, Jake made a discovery that confirmed his suspicions. Pressed into the muddy bank were footprints unlike anything he had seen in his years of wilderness travel. The prints measured roughly 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, with clearly defined toe impressions that showed this was no bear or known animal. Jake whispered to his camera as he knelt beside the clearest print, noting that they had been made sometime the night before or early that morning. He observed the depth and estimated that whatever made these tracks had to weigh at least 400 pounds. Jake spent 20 minutes documenting the prints from every angle, using his hiking pole for scale and taking detailed measurements. The tracks showed a clear pattern of bipedal movement, with a stride length that suggested something much larger than a human, but walking upright like one. More disturbing was the direction of the tracks. They paralleled the trail Jake was following, staying about 50 yards back in the dense forest. Whatever had made these prints was following him, staying close enough to observe, but far enough away to remain hidden. The realization that he was being stalked sent a chill down Jake's spine. His 8 years of solo hiking had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that he was in potential danger. But he was already 12 miles from the nearest road, with no choice but to continue forward or attempt a dangerous solo retreat through unfamiliar terrain. Jake's afternoon became a psychological battle between fear and fascination. His cameras captured his growing paranoia as he constantly looked over his shoulder, jumped at every sound, and second-guessed every decision. Yet he continued hiking deeper into the wilderness, driven by a combination of stubbornness and the knowledge that he might be documenting something extraordinary. At 3:45 p.m., Jake's stalker made its presence known in a way that left no doubt about its intelligence. While taking a break beside a fallen log, Jake heard the same resonant call from the previous night, but this time it came from directly ahead of him on the trail. When he looked up, a massive figure stood in the path about 100 yards away, partially obscured by the forest shadows, but clearly visible. The creature was even larger than Jake had estimated from the night footage. Standing upright, it appeared to be at least 8 feet tall, with a build that suggested immense strength. Its entire body was covered in dark, coarse hair, and its face, while difficult to see clearly, showed unmistakably intelligent eyes that seemed to be studying Jake as intently as he was studying it. Jake whispered with a shaking voice as he slowly raised his camera, acknowledging that it was real and actually happening. The standoff lasted approximately 30 seconds, long enough for Jake to capture several minutes of video footage that would later be analyzed by experts around the world. The creature showed no signs of aggression, but its posture conveyed a clear message. It was aware of Jake's presence and was choosing to reveal itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the forest with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Jake was left alone on the trail, his heart pounding and his hands shaking as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The encounter changed everything about Jake's trip. What had begun as a routine backpacking adventure had become something far more significant and dangerous. He now knew with certainty that he was sharing the forest with an unknown creature of remarkable intelligence and size. Jake's decision to continue hiking rather than retreat would prove to be both brave and foolish. Over the next 3 days, his mysterious companion would reveal itself repeatedly, always maintaining a careful distance but making its presence unmistakably known. The psychological pressure of being constantly watched by something so powerful began to take its toll. Day 3 brought more direct encounters. Jake's morning routine was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps circling his campsite, just beyond the range of his camera's night vision. When he emerged from his tent at dawn, he found that his food bag hung 12 feet high in a tree, according to proper bear safety protocols, had been carefully lowered and placed beside his tent. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. His stalker could have taken anything it wanted. Jake told his camera that this was getting really weird, his voice tight with stress. He described how it seemed like the creature was trying to communicate or something, but he didn't know what it wanted. The trail on day 3 led through some of the most remote wilderness in the Olympic Peninsula. Jake saw no other hikers, no aircraft overhead, no signs of human presence except the faint path beneath his feet. His isolation was complete, shared only with a creature that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of known science. At midday, while filming a segment about old-growth forest ecology, Jake captured footage that would become some of the most analyzed Bigfoot evidence ever recorded. His handheld camera was focused on a massive cedar when something moved in the background. A dark figure that stepped briefly into view before disappearing behind another tree. The figure was clearly the same creature Jake had been encountering, but this footage showed it in daylight with remarkable clarity. Its human-like posture was unmistakable, as was the intelligence evident in how it used the forest cover to remain mostly hidden while still allowing itself to be seen. Jake realized while reviewing the footage on his camera screen that the creature knew he was filming and was choosing when to show itself. This revelation was both thrilling and terrifying. Jake was documenting behavior that suggested a level of intelligence far beyond what mainstream science attributed to any unknown primate. His stalker wasn't just avoiding humans, it was actively managing its interactions with them. The psychological pressure intensified on day 4. Jake's sleep was constantly interrupted by sounds around his campsite, footsteps, breathing, and occasional vocalizations that seemed designed to let him know he was being watched. His cameras captured glimpses of movement throughout each night, but never enough to provide the definitive proof that would convince skeptics. Jake's commentary became increasingly strained as exhaustion and stress took their toll. He admitted to his camera on the morning of day 4 that he didn't know how much more of this he could take, feeling like he was losing his mind out there. But Jake's ordeal was far from over. Day 4 would bring the most intense encounter yet, one that would test his courage and provide footage that cryptozoologists would study for years to come. The trail on day 4 climbed steadily toward Enchanted Valley, a remote alpine meadow surrounded by towering peaks. As Jake gained elevation, the forest began to thin, providing less cover for his mysterious companion. He hoped this might mean an end to the constant surveillance, but he was wrong. At 2:30 p.m., while crossing an open meadow, Jake heard the now familiar call echoing off the surrounding mountains. But this time, the sound came from multiple directions, at least 3 different sources positioned around the meadow's perimeter. Jake realized with growing alarm that he wasn't being followed by one creature, but by several. He whispered to his camera that there was more than one, slowly turning to scan the tree line and realizing they had him surrounded. The meadow crossing became the longest 10 minutes of Jake's life. He could feel eyes watching him from the forest edge, and his cameras captured several glimpses of large, dark shapes moving between the trees. The creatures were coordinating their movements, staying hidden while maintaining visual contact with their human visitor. Jake reached the far side of the meadow without incident, but the message was clear. He was completely at the mercy of beings that could have overwhelmed him at any time. Their restraint suggested either benevolent intentions or a level of strategic thinking that was deeply unsettling. The final night of Jake's trip brought the most dramatic encounter yet. Camped beside a small alpine lake, Jake was awakened at 3:15 a.m. by the sound of something large moving through his campsite. His tent-mounted camera captured a figure approaching to within 10 feet of where he lay, close enough that he could hear its breathing through the thin nylon walls. The creature stayed beside Jake's tent for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded almost conversational. Jake lay perfectly still, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the creature could hear it. The footage from that night would later reveal remarkable details about the being's physical characteristics and behavior. When Jake finally worked up the courage to peer through his tent's mesh window, he found himself looking directly into a face that would haunt his dreams for months afterward. The creature's eyes reflected his headlamp's light, showing an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and curious. For several seconds, human and unknown beings studied each other through the thin barrier of the tent wall. Then, as if satisfied with what it had learned, the creature withdrew into the darkness, leaving Jake alone with the knowledge that he had just experienced something that would change his life forever. Jake's final day of hiking was a blur of exhaustion and relief. The creatures that had followed him for 4 days seemed to have withdrawn, perhaps satisfied that he was leaving their territory. His pace was faster than usual, driven by a desperate desire to return to the familiar world of roads and cell phone signals. The Graves Creek trailhead appeared through the trees like a vision of salvation. Jake's truck sat exactly where he had left it 5 days earlier, but he felt like a completely different person from the one who had started this journey. His cameras contained footage that would challenge everything science thought it knew about the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Jake's first stop after leaving the trailhead was the Quinault Ranger Station, where he reported his encounters to skeptical but professional park rangers. His footage was copied and forwarded to wildlife biologists and law enforcement agencies, beginning a chain of analysis that would eventually reach the highest levels of government. The drive back to Portland gave Jake time to process what he had experienced. By the time he reached his apartment, he had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would dedicate himself to understanding and documenting the creatures he had encountered, regardless of the personal cost or professional ridicule that might follow. Jake's first week back in Portland was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and obsessive video review. He had captured over 40 hours of footage during his 5-day trip, and hidden within that material were dozens of brief glimpses, sounds, and anomalies that painted a picture of intelligence beyond anything he had imagined possible in the wilderness. The clearest footage came from his final night, when the creature had approached his tent. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed details that made Jake's hands shake as he worked at his computer. The being's facial features showed a blend of human and ape characteristics, but the eyes held an awareness that transcended both. When enhanced and slowed down, the creature's vocalizations revealed complex tonal patterns that suggested structured communication. Jake's YouTube channel had always focused on the beauty and solitude of wilderness hiking, but now he faced an impossible decision. Publishing his Bigfoot footage would transform his life in ways he couldn't predict. His credibility as an outdoor educator would be questioned. His peaceful hiking adventures would become media circuses, and he would forever be known as that Bigfoot guy, rather than the serious nature photographer he had worked years to become. But the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Jake had always prided himself on honesty with his audience, and hiding this discovery felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. After a week of agonizing deliberation, he made his choice. On September 28, 2021, Jake uploaded a video titled, "Something Followed Me for 5 Days in the Olympic Wilderness, Raw Footage." The 43-minute compilation included his clearest encounters, enhanced audio of the vocalizations, and detailed analysis of the footprint evidence. His introduction was simple and direct, explaining that he had been hiking alone in the wilderness for 8 years and had never experienced anything like this. He wasn't asking viewers to believe him, he was just showing them what happened so they could draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 100,000 times and generated thousands of comments, ranging from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Major news outlets picked up the story, and Jake found himself fielding interview requests from around the world. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum from Idaho State University was among the first scientists to contact Jake directly. As one of the world's leading experts on Bigfoot evidence, Dr. Meldrum had seen countless hoaxes and misidentifications, but Jake's footage impressed him with its consistency and detail. Dr. Meldrum explained during their first phone conversation that what struck him about Jake's documentation was the behavioral coherence. These weren't random encounters. They showed a pattern of intelligent observation and interaction that was very difficult to fake convincingly. The scientific analysis that followed was more thorough than anything Jake had expected. Audio experts studied the vocalizations, finding harmonic frequencies and structural patterns that didn't match any known North American wildlife. Primatologists analyzed the creature's movement patterns, noting locomotion characteristics that suggested a large bipedal primate adapted for forest environments. Most compelling was the analysis of Jake's footprint casts. Dr. Grover Krantz's former colleagues at Washington State University examined the plaster impressions using techniques developed for forensic investigations. The prints showed dermal ridges, pressure patterns, and anatomical details that would be nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptical organizations like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry published detailed critiques of Jake's evidence, suggesting alternative explanations ranging from misidentified bears to elaborate hoaxes. The debate raged across social media platforms and academic forums, with Jake caught in the middle of a controversy he had never sought. The attention took a serious toll on Jake's personal life. His girlfriend of 3 years, Sarah, struggled with the sudden media scrutiny and the way their relationship had become secondary to Jake's obsession with his forest encounters. Friends who had once joined him on hiking trips now made excuses to avoid the cameras and questions that followed him everywhere. Sarah told him during one of their final arguments that he wasn't the same person who had left for that trip. It was like those things in the forest had taken away the Jake she fell in love with and left someone else in his place. She wasn't wrong. Jake found himself unable to enjoy simple hikes without constantly scanning the forest for signs of his mysterious watchers. Every shadow could hide a massive figure. Every unusual sound might be an attempt at communication. The wilderness that had once been his sanctuary had become a place of constant vigilance and anticipation. But Jake's dedication to understanding his experience also brought unexpected connections. He began corresponding with other witnesses who had remained silent for years, afraid of ridicule or disbelief. Their stories revealed a pattern of encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest that suggested a stable population of these creatures living in the most remote wilderness areas. Maria Santos, a wildlife biologist from Bellingham, contacted Jake 6 months after his video went viral. She had been conducting unofficial research into Bigfoot sightings for over a decade, documenting reports from credible witnesses including park rangers, wildlife photographers, and experienced outdoors people. Maria explained during their first meeting that Jake's footage corroborated behavioral patterns she had been tracking for years. These creatures seemed to have a complex social structure and territorial behavior that was far more sophisticated than mainstream science acknowledged. Together, Jake and Maria began planning return expeditions to the Olympic Peninsula, using Jake's documented encounter locations as starting points for more systematic research. They installed motion-activated cameras throughout the Quinault River Valley and began collecting environmental DNA samples from water sources where the creatures might drink. The research yielded tantalizing results. Several cameras captured brief glimpses of large bipedal figures moving through the forest at night. Water samples contained genetic material that didn't match any known species in scientific databases. Most intriguingly, audio recordings revealed complex vocalizations that seemed to represent a form of long-distance communication between different groups. Jake's life had been permanently altered by his 5 days in the Olympic wilderness. His YouTube channel evolved from hiking entertainment to serious cryptozoological research, attracting a global audience of researchers, witnesses, and curious observers. He published a book about his experience, Followed: 5 Days with the Unknown, which became a bestseller in the cryptozoology community. But success came with a price. Jake's relationships suffered under the weight of his obsession, and his mental health struggled with the constant pressure of being a public figure in a controversial field. He began working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, learning to process the psychological impact of his encounters. His therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, explained that what he had experienced was a form of contact with an intelligence that existed outside normal understanding. It was natural that such an encounter would fundamentally change how he saw the world and his place in it. 3 years after his original encounter, Jake continues to research and document evidence of Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. His work has contributed to a growing body of scientific literature that suggests these creatures may represent a surviving population of ancient hominids that have adapted to life in North America's most remote wilderness areas. The creatures that followed Jake for 5 days in September 2021 remain as mysterious as ever, but their brief interaction with one curious human has opened a window into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, reminding us that even in our modern age of satellite imagery and GPS tracking, the wilderness still holds secrets that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Jake's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from seeking them out, but from remaining open to the unexpected encounters that await those brave enough to venture alone into the wild places where mystery still lives.
Give me the camera.
On November 12, 2014, an unexplainable creature followed Kevin Boone into the Olympic Peninsula. He returned hours later in utter shock with terrifying 43-second footage. When investigators reviewed the clip, everyone was in complete disbelief of what they saw. A horrifying figure stared back at the camera, 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Kevin had always felt comfortable in the wilderness. Growing up in rural Oregon, he had learned to read animal signs before he could properly tie his shoes. Northridge Optics had contracted him for what should have been a straightforward assignment: field test 5 prototype thermal trail cameras designed for wildlife documentaries. The company needed data on clarity, trigger response time, and durability under harsh conditions. For Kevin, the job was simple incentive: good pay, minimal oversight, and a bonus for every usable capture in a span of 2 weeks. It should have been routine work, but routine doesn't explain what he found. Kevin had been hunting in these Washington woods for 3 years. He had chosen a section of the Hoh rainforest that locals called the kill zone, not for any sinister reason, but because of the extraordinary concentration of predator activity. Cougar signs were everywhere, scratch marks on trees, scat deposits, and the scattered remains of deer kills. For a camera test focused on capturing large predators, it was perfect. Kevin pulled his truck to a stop at the first waypoint, checking his GPS coordinates against the hand-drawn map spread across his dashboard. The rain had intensified, turning the dirt road into a muddy slurry that would make extraction difficult if his truck got stuck. He grabbed his backpack, loaded with the first camera unit, mounting hardware, and 5 pounds of fresh venison. By noon, Kevin had installed all 5 cameras across a 3-mile stretch of forest. The unit was state-of-the-art, capable of detecting heat signatures at distances up to 200 yards, with motion activation sensitive enough to trigger on a mouse. Each one was positioned to monitor a different type of terrain: creek crossings, ridgelines, dense undergrowth, and open meadows. Kevin logged every detail: coordinates, settings, weather, photos, exactly the way Northridge Optics paid him to. He even had spare cameras just in case the previous ones fail. The bait stations were strategically placed to attract cougars, black bears, and other large predators that might test the camera's capabilities. He had no idea something else might test him instead. As he hiked back toward his truck, Kevin felt a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed too quiet. In his experience, healthy ecosystems buzzed with activity: birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects humming. But the kill zone felt muted, as if the usual inhabitants had fled or gone into hiding. He said that he initially dismissed the feeling as fatigue and weather-induced paranoia. Hours of hiking through rain-soaked terrain would make anyone jumpy. Kevin loaded his gear into the truck and drove back to his motel in Forks, a small logging town that served as his base of operations. He would return in 48 hours to check the cameras and download their memory cards. Those 48 hours would mark the last time Kevin felt safe in the woods. 2 days later, Kevin returned to check his cameras. The rain had stopped, but the forest floor remained saturated and treacherous. The first sign that something was wrong came when he reached the creek crossing. The camera was gone, not just missing, violently removed. The mounting bracket remained attached to the cedar trunk, but it had been twisted apart with tremendous force. Metal components that should have required tools to separate lay scattered across the forest floor. Kevin found the camera itself 40 feet away, partially buried under a pile of fallen branches. The unit was destroyed. The lens housing was cracked, the battery compartment crushed, and the memory card slot bent backward at an impossible angle. Whatever had done this possessed strength far beyond any animal Kevin had encountered. Even a large black bear would have simply knocked the camera down, not systematically dismantled it. Something intelligent had handled that machine. But why? Kevin photographed the damage and made detailed notes, then continued to the second location. This camera was intact, but had been moved. Instead of pointing toward the bait station, it now faced directly up into the canopy, as if something had deliberately redirected its view. The memory card was missing, the plastic slot pulled outward with enough force to crack the surrounding housing. At the third location, Kevin found something that made his blood run cold. The camera remained in position, but the ground around the bait station had been disturbed in a pattern unlike anything he had seen before. Large, deep impressions in the soft earth suggested something massive had moved through the area. But these weren't paw prints or hoof marks. They were elongated depressions that looked almost like oversized human footprints. Kevin knelt beside the clearest impression and placed his hand next to it for scale. The print was nearly 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with what appeared to be toe marks at the front. The depth suggested a creature weighing at least 400 pounds, possibly more. But the stride length between prints was over 6 feet, far longer than any known animal in the Pacific Northwest. He photographed the prints from multiple angles, using his field ruler for scale reference. Whatever had made these tracks walked upright on 2 legs and possessed a gait unlike any human or known primate. The implication sent a chill down Kevin's spine. The fourth camera location yielded more disturbing evidence. The unit hung from its mounting strap, swaying gently in the breeze. But when Kevin examined it closely, he discovered that the lens had been deliberately covered with mud and vegetation, not randomly but carefully, as if something had wanted to blind the camera without destroying it entirely. But why damage the others, while some were partially altered? The bait station told an even stranger story. The venison remained untouched, but the surrounding area had been cleared of all vegetation in a perfect circle, roughly 20 feet in diameter. Branches, ferns, and moss had been removed and stacked in neat piles at the circle's perimeter. In the center of the cleared space sat a single, flat stone that hadn't been there during Kevin's initial setup. Kevin approached the stone cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his shoulder. The rock was roughly 3 feet in diameter and appeared to have been carried from elsewhere. Its composition didn't match the local geology. Arranged around it in a spiral pattern were bones, lots of bones. What could do something like this? Deer ribs and leg bones formed the inner spiral, their surfaces clean and white as if they had been stripped of all flesh and marrow. Moving outward, Kevin identified raccoon skulls, what appeared to be elk vertebrae, and several bones too large to belong to any animal he recognized. The arrangement was deliberate, artistic even, with each bone placed at precise intervals to maintain the spiral's symmetry. Was this the work of a person, or something trying to imitate one? Kevin had seen predator feeding sites before, but nothing like this. Cougars and bears were messy eaters, leaving scattered remains and obvious signs of their feeding behavior. This looked more like a ritual or display, the work of intelligence, not instinct. As Kevin documented the scene, he became aware of a sound that made his skin crawl. a low, rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from the forest around him. It wasn't the random noise of branches rubbing together or rocks settling. This was deliberate, almost like a form of communication. The clicking sound grew more distinct as Kevin crouched beside the bone spiral, his camera capturing every detail of the macabre arrangement. According to him, the rhythm was too regular to be natural. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, repeat. It seemed to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously, as if whatever was making the sound was moving through the forest canopy above him. How many of them were there? Kevin's training kicked in. He had spent years in predator territory and knew that unusual sounds often preceded dangerous encounters. Mountain lions were known to stalk prey for hours before attacking, and black bears could move with surprising stealth when motivated. But this clicking pattern didn't match any animal behavior he had studied. He finished photographing the bone spiral and moved quickly toward the 5th camera location, his rifle now unslung and ready. The clicking followed him, maintaining the same distance, but never quite revealing its source. Kevin paused several times, scanning the forest canopy through his rifle scope, but saw nothing beyond the usual tangle of branches and moss. The final camera had been completely destroyed. Kevin found pieces of it scattered across a 100-yard radius, as if it had been torn apart and hurled in different directions with tremendous force. What kind of animal rips metal apart like paper? Kevin considered leaving, but daylight was fading fast, and his vehicle was several miles back through dense terrain. If he left now, he'd lose the site's exact layout and any chance to document how the equipment had been disturbed. He decided to stay through dusk and collect sound overnight, standard protocol for unexpected field anomalies. He later told investigators that as evening settled over the canopy, he began to hear movement circling just beyond the tree line, deliberate and steady, as if measuring distance. That night, Kevin sheltered beneath a tarp near the destroyed camera site. He organized his gear by headlamp, cataloging fragments and photographing the damage. The evidence was undeniable. Something large, deliberate, and strong had dismantled the setup piece by piece. The bone spiral alone suggested reasoning beyond instinct. But what unsettled him most was its precision. Every tripod leg was laid parallel, every lens facing outward, as though arranged for him to find. By midnight, his hands were shaking from adrenaline. He huddled beside his tent, rifle across his knees, and watched the tree line through thermal scope. Once, a faint shape appeared on the screen, upright, tall, heat signature steady. It lingered for several seconds, then stepped backward and vanished. He drafted a field report on his laptop, intending to send it once he regained signal. He attached selected photographs, but he mentioned holding back the most disturbing images, the bone spiral and the massive footprints. He said that sharing those details might complicate his professional relationship with the company. The next morning, he walked back to the equipment cache to salvage data from the damaged units. Most were ruined, memory cards torn, casings cracked, as if twisted apart by hand. Only one camera remained intact, half buried in moss and tilted toward the canopy. It held a single undamaged video file, time-stamped just after dusk. Kevin hesitated before pressing play, realizing the device had been turned on long after he'd left the area the night before. Was this what it wanted him to find? The footage was brief, lasting only 43 seconds, but what it showed made Kevin's hands shake as he watched it on his laptop screen. The thermal imaging revealed a large heat signature moving through the frame at approximately 2:17 a.m. The figure was clearly bipedal, standing at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung in a distinctly non-human gait. But what made the footage truly unsettling was the creature's behavior. It approached the camera directly, as if aware of its presence, and appeared to study the device for several seconds. The creature's proportions were wrong for any known animal. Its torso was too broad, its arms too long, its head too large. The thermal image showed the creature's head tilting from side to side in what looked like curiosity or assessment. Then the feed cuts to static. Had it known that he would see this later? Despite his growing unease, the hunter in him refused to back down. He'd tracked apex predators his entire adult life, and whatever was out there had challenged him on his own ground. His pack held barely enough provisions to last another day, yet he told himself that was all the time he'd need to prove what he'd seen. But at that moment, did he ever stop to consider whether he was still the hunter, or if he had already become the prey? That afternoon, he had set up his personal backup cameras before dark and established a separate camp where he could monitor the area overnight. If something was living in the kill zone, he intended to document it properly. He established his base camp in a small clearing roughly half a mile from the original camera locations. The spot offered good visibility in multiple directions while providing cover from the surrounding trees. Kevin set up a camouflaged blind, arranged his monitoring equipment, and prepared for a long night of observation. As darkness fell, Kevin activated his new camera network. He had positioned 6 units in a rough perimeter around the bone spiral site, each equipped with motion sensors and infrared illumination. His base camp monitor would display feeds from all cameras simultaneously, allowing him to track movement across the entire area. The first few hours passed quietly. Kevin's screens showed the usual parade of small nocturnal animals. He began to wonder if whatever had destroyed his original cameras had moved on to other territory, or was it watching from just beyond the glow of his screens? At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor alarm chimed softly. Camera 3, positioned near the creek crossing, had detected something large moving through its field of view. Kevin leaned forward, studying the thermal display as a massive heat signature emerged from the tree line. The creature was even larger than the previous footage had suggested. Standing fully upright, it towered at least 8 feet tall, with a body mass that Kevin estimated at over 500 pounds. Its movements were fluid and purposeful as it approached the creek, pausing to examine the area where Kevin's original camera had been destroyed. Kevin held his breath as the creature moved closer to camera 3. The thermal imaging revealed incredible detail. The creature's face was distinctly primate-like, but far more robust than any known species. Its brow ridge was pronounced, its jaw massive, and its eyes reflected the camera's infrared illumination with an eerie green glow. But what struck Kevin most was the creature's obvious intelligence. It examined the new camera setup with the same methodical attention it had shown before, tilting its head and reaching out with one enormous hand to touch the mounting bracket. For a moment, Kevin thought it might destroy this camera as well. Instead, the creature did something that chilled him to the bone. It looked directly into the camera lens, as if aware that someone was watching from the other end. The message was unmistakable. The creature knew that Kevin was somewhere nearby and was warning him, threatening even. Kevin's hands trembled as he reached for his rifle, but the creature had already melted back into the forest with surprising stealth for something so large. The thermal cameras tracked its movement for several minutes as it circled the perimeter of Kevin's monitoring network, always staying just beyond clear visual range, but making its presence known. And then at 12:23 a.m., all 6 cameras went dark simultaneously. Kevin stared at his blank monitors in disbelief. The cameras had been functioning perfectly moments before, and the odds of 6 separate units failing at exactly the same time were astronomical. He tried cycling through different feeds, adjusting settings, even rebooting the entire system, but nothing worked. Kevin made the decision to abandon his damaged equipment and move deeper into the forest instead of retreating. Whatever was out there had demonstrated the ability to disable sophisticated electronics and possessed an intelligence far beyond any known animal. Leaving now would mean losing the only evidence he had, and 2 days of isolation, turning back through miles of dense terrain, felt riskier than holding his position. As he repacked what gear still worked, Kevin said he heard the clicking sound again. This time it was closer, coming from multiple directions at once. The rhythm had changed, faster now, more urgent, almost agitated. He shouldered his pack and moved toward higher ground, using his handheld GPS to mark a temporary shelter site. The clicking followed him, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always keeping the same distance. Kevin resisted the urge to run, knowing that flight might trigger a predatory pursuit response from whatever was stalking him. He said that the hike through the ravine felt endless. Every shadow seemed to conceal movement. Every sound suggested something pacing his steps. The clicking grew louder and more intricate, as if multiple sources were communicating, reacting to his movements in real time. By midnight, his flashlight was dimming. Kevin found a narrow rise above a stream bed and made camp beneath a cedar, his rifle across his knees. He stayed awake through the night, but by then the forest moved and breathed as it should. Owls calling from the ridgeline, the faint rustle of small animals in the brush, wind shifting through the branches. Nothing was now out of place. Near dawn, he realized that whatever was following him had left. When the first light filtered through the canopy, Kevin made a decision that would define the rest of his notes. He would not leave the forest until he could prove what he had encountered. The hunter in him demanded closure, even as every instinct told him to run. He decided to return to the area where he first set up his cameras, a decision leaning more on instinct than reason. But what exactly was waiting for him to take one step too far? The previous night's unease hadn't faded. It had curdled into something heavier, almost magnetic. His remaining food could barely last another day, but the thought of leaving empty-handed felt worse than the hunger. He kept telling himself that every broken branch, every distant crack of wood had an explanation. That if he could just catch one clear track, one print, it would all make sense again. By noon, fog had rolled in thick and cold, muffling sound and sight alike. He followed his GPS coordinates back toward the creek crossing where the last camera had been found. The forest felt rearranged, wrong in small ways. The markings on the birch he'd cut the day before were gone, replaced by fresh gouges higher up, far above his reach. He stopped several times to listen, but the silence pressed in, absolute. When he finally reached the clearing, it was as if something had been waiting for him to return. The first sign that something had changed came when he reached the clearing where he had established his monitoring station. His equipment was gone, not scattered or destroyed like the original cameras, but completely absent. The camouflaged blind had been dismantled with surgical precision, its components stacked in neat piles at the clearing's edge. Kevin approached the equipment piles cautiously, his rifle ready. The organization was too methodical to be the work of scavenging animals. Someone or something had carefully sorted his gear by type and function. Electronic equipment in one pile, camping gear in another, tools and hardware in a third. But it was the fourth pile that made Kevin's blood run cold. His 6 thermal cameras had been arranged in a perfect circle, their lenses all pointing inward toward a single object placed at the center. A flat stone identical to the one he had found at the bone spiral site. Was this a warning or an invitation? Kevin said that he photographed the arrangement from multiple angles, then carefully examined each camera. None showed signs of damage, but all had been deliberately disabled. Battery compartments had been opened and the power cells removed with surprising delicacy. Memory cards were missing, their slots bent outward with the same precise force he had observed before. The message was clear. His surveillance had been detected, analyzed, and neutralized by something with both the intelligence to understand electronic equipment and the manual dexterity to disable it without causing unnecessary damage. As he documented the scene, Kevin became aware of movement in his peripheral vision. He turned slowly, rifle raised, and said that he found himself face to face with the creature from his thermal footage. Had it been waiting for him to return all along? It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed behind a massive Douglas fir, but close enough for Kevin to see details that the camera had missed. The creature was even larger than he had estimated, easily 9 feet tall, with a body mass that dwarfed any known primate. He said that its fur was reddish-brown, thick and coarse, covering a frame that suggested incredible physical power. For several seconds, man and creature regarded each other across the clearing. Kevin's finger rested on his rifle's trigger, but something in the creature's posture suggested that it posed no immediate threat. It stood perfectly still, watching him with the same attention it had shown his cameras. Then the creature did something that shattered Kevin's remaining skepticism about its intelligence. It raised one massive hand and pointed deliberately at Kevin's rifle, then shook its head slowly from side to side. The gesture was unmistakably human, a clear communication that weapons were unnecessary. Kevin found himself lowering his rifle despite every survival instinct screaming at him to maintain a defensive posture. The creature nodded once, a gesture of approval or perhaps gratitude, then stepped fully into the clearing. Kevin said that, up close, the creature's size was overwhelming. But despite its intimidating physical presence, its movements were careful and controlled, suggesting a being that was acutely aware of its own strength. Was this intelligence or empathy, or something far beyond both? The creature approached Kevin's arranged equipment and gestured toward the cameras with one enormous hand. Then it looked directly at Kevin and made a series of soft, clicking vocalizations, clearly intended as communication. The sounds were low and melodic, almost like a primitive form of speech. Kevin realized that the creature was trying to explain something about the cameras, perhaps why it had disabled them. Kevin said that it moved closer, close enough that he could smell its distinctive odor. He described it as not unpleasant, but wild and earthy, like moss and cedar mixed with something uniquely animal. The creature examined Kevin with obvious curiosity, tilting its massive head to study him from multiple angles. What, in that moment, did it see when it looked at him? An intruder? An equal? Or a mistake that needed correcting? Then, in a moment that would replay in Kevin's mind for the rest of his life, the creature lifted one massive arm and pointed, slowly, deliberately, toward the tree line behind him. The gesture was unmistakable. Leave. Kevin froze, the rifle half raised, instinct warring with reason. The creature didn't advance. It just stood there, breathing heavily, its eyes fixed on him with something that wasn't rage, but warning. Without warning, it dropped to all fours and exploded forward in a short, thunderous bluff charge, stopping just short of him, exhaling a deep, guttural roar that shook the air. Mud and leaves sprayed up between them. The message couldn't have been clearer. Whatever this thing was, it wanted him gone. Now. Kevin backed away, step by step, not daring to turn his back until the shape faded into the mist. He'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that had looked at him with recognition. He hiked back toward the logging road in silence, the forest unnervingly still around him. By the time he reached his truck, mist had swallowed the trees, and he said it felt less like he'd escaped, more like he'd been allowed to leave. 2 days later, Kevin submitted his findings, thermal images, detailed field notes, to Northridge Optics and a regional wildlife research group. Within days, internal emails surfaced describing his report as psychotic field fiction. Both organizations cut ties immediately, citing inconsistencies in timestamps, missing metadata, and observer fatigue. The footage was quietly removed from the shared server, and his contract was terminated. He tried going public. Local radio hosts treated his account as entertainment, not evidence. Wildlife experts and skeptics flooded forums with breakdowns of his data, pointing out compression artifacts, GPS drift, and pareidolia in the thermal stills. A state biologist labeled the footage a starving black bear with patchy fur, and a local outdoor magazine ran a short piece titled The Boone Hoax. Still, the 11 seconds of dashcam footage leaked. The clip showed a massive shape crossing a logging road at dawn, dragging what looked like a deer carcass. It paused, just long enough to seem aware of the camera, then vanished into the trees. Independent analysts confirmed the file hadn't been tampered with, but most insisted it was a man in ghillie camouflage or a forced perspective trick caused by mist and distance. Wildlife officers who revisited the site noted the ring of bones described in his report, but dismissed it as scavenger scatter from cougars or coyotes. A regional ranger later stated, "Everything about that area fits normal predation patterns. Nothing supernatural here, just a hunter who stayed too long and scared himself." Even online, believers were outnumbered. Debunkers slowed the video frame by frame, marking limb ratios and shadow inconsistencies. A university anthropology forum tore apart his measurements, calling them an amateur's guesswork. My name is Patrick Coverton, and in March 2023, the Bigfoot I had frozen suddenly escaped from his cryogenic chamber, challenging everything science understood about suspended animation. The Sasquatch became far more dangerous than before. Consumed with anger, it had been building up for 40 years, and the creature remembered exactly who to brutally attack. In November 1983, my specialized hunting team successfully tracked and captured an adult male Sasquatch in the remote Cascade Mountains. The creature, standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing an estimated 800 pounds, was brought down with high-powered tranquilizer rounds after a 3-week hunt following reports of livestock killings that suggested an unusually aggressive specimen. The final confrontation took place in a narrow canyon where the creature fought with savage intelligence even as the sedatives took effect. Multiple dart rounds were required to overwhelm its massive system, each shot carefully placed to avoid vital organs. The creature's resistance to tranquilizers was remarkable, requiring doses that would have killed any known mammal before finally collapsing with eyes that burned with unmistakable hatred. My examination revealed multiple bullet wounds from previous encounters with humans, evidence that this specimen had survived encounters that should have been fatal. The wounds were in various stages of healing, suggesting remarkable regenerative capabilities that went far beyond normal mammalian biology. The creature was immediately transported to my private research facility located in the remote Montana wilderness. My research facility was a massive concrete structure built in complete isolation, surrounded by hundreds of miles of uninhabited wilderness that provided perfect concealment from government oversight and public scrutiny. The complex consisted of multiple interconnected buildings designed to withstand extreme weather conditions and potential security threats, with reinforced walls that could contain the most dangerous specimens known to science. The facility's location had been chosen specifically for its remoteness and inaccessibility. The nearest town was over 200 miles away, connected only by a single dirt road that was impassable during winter months. Helicopter landing pads provided the primary means of transportation, while underground fuel storage and supply warehouses allowed the facility to operate independently for months without external contact. The main laboratory building housed the most advanced cryogenic preservation systems ever constructed for biological research. The preservation chambers were custom-built using military-grade materials and technology that I had acquired through classified government contracts. Each chamber was capable of maintaining perfect environmental conditions for decades while monitoring every aspect of a specimen's biological status. The facility's power systems were completely independent, utilizing a combination of diesel generators, solar panels, and wind turbines that provided redundant energy sources. Underground fuel tanks contained enough diesel to operate the facility for 2 years without resupply, while battery backup systems could maintain critical preservation functions for weeks during power outages. Security systems included motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and electromagnetic field detectors that monitored the entire perimeter for any unauthorized approach. The facility's isolation made detection unlikely, but I had invested heavily in technology that would provide early warning of any potential threats to my research operations. The preservation process began immediately upon the creature's arrival at the facility. I administered a carefully formulated cocktail of antifreeze compounds and cellular preservatives that I had developed specifically for large mammalian specimens. The chemical mixture represented years of my research into cryogenic preservation, incorporating compounds that could prevent cellular damage while maintaining tissue integrity during extended freezing periods. The creature was placed in the facility's primary preservation chamber, a technological marvel that represented the pinnacle of my cryogenic research. The chamber was constructed from materials that could withstand extreme temperature variations while maintaining perfect environmental control. The interior was lined with hundreds of sensors that monitored every aspect of the creature's condition, from core body temperature to neural activity patterns that might indicate consciousness or distress. The preservation chamber maintained a constant temperature of negative 196 degrees Celsius, effectively stopping all biological processes while preventing the cellular damage that typically occurred during freezing. Automated systems continuously monitored atmospheric composition, pressure levels, and electromagnetic fields within the chamber, making microscopic adjustments to ensure optimal preservation conditions. The chamber's design incorporated advanced life support systems that could theoretically maintain the specimen indefinitely. Computer systems analyzed thousands of data points every second, detecting any deviation from perfect stasis and automatically correcting environmental conditions. The technology represented decades of my research into suspended animation and represented the most sophisticated preservation system ever constructed. Backup systems included redundant cooling mechanisms, emergency power supplies, and fail-safe protocols that would maintain preservation even during catastrophic facility failures. The chamber was designed to operate independently for extended periods, with internal power sources and environmental controls that could function without external support. For 40 years, the creature remained in perfect stasis, while my research partner, Dr. Helena Voss, and I conducted the most comprehensive study of Sasquatch physiology ever attempted. Our research team consisted of specialists in genetics, neurology, cellular biology, and cryptozoology, all sworn to secrecy regarding the nature of our work and the location of the facility. Our initial research focused on basic physiological analysis and genetic mapping. Tissue samples were extracted using specialized equipment that could obtain specimens without compromising the preservation process. The samples revealed cellular structures that were unlike anything in the scientific literature, with characteristics that placed the creature outside any known taxonomic classification. Genetic analysis revealed DNA sequences that showed both human and unknown characteristics, suggesting an evolutionary path that had diverged from human ancestors millions of years ago. The creature's genetic code contained sequences that were completely novel, indicating adaptations for survival in extreme environments that exceeded anything seen in nature. The creature's cellular structure was remarkable in its efficiency and durability. Muscle fibers were 3 times denser than human tissue, with energy utilization rates that exceeded any known mammal. The cellular walls were reinforced with protein structures that provided exceptional resistance to damage and enhanced regenerative capabilities. Bone analysis revealed a skeletal structure that was reinforced with mineral deposits that made it nearly unbreakable. The bones contained calcium concentrations that were 50% higher than human bones, while maintaining flexibility that prevented brittleness. The skeletal system was perfectly designed for supporting massive muscle mass while providing protection against impact damage. The nervous system showed the most remarkable characteristics. Neural pathways were more complex than human brain structure, with redundancies that would allow survival of injuries that would be fatal to any known species. Brain scans revealed cognitive capabilities that approached human levels while maintaining characteristics that were uniquely adapted for survival in extreme environments. Most significantly, our research revealed the creature's extraordinary regenerative capabilities. The bullet wounds that had been present during capture continued to heal, even in cryogenic preservation. Dr. Voss and I documented the slow but steady repair of damaged tissue, initially assuming it was simply residual cellular activity with no greater significance than normal wound healing processes. However, detailed analysis over the first decade revealed that the healing process was far more complex than we had initially understood. The creature's regenerative mechanisms were not simply repairing damage, they were actively improving and enhancing the creature's physical systems. Damaged muscle tissue was being rebuilt with increased density and strength, while bone fractures healed with additional mineral deposits that made the bones stronger than before injury. The nervous system showed the most remarkable changes during preservation. New neural pathways developed throughout the first 20 years, creating connections that enhanced coordination, reflexes, and cognitive processing. Brain scans from year 10 showed measurably different patterns than those from the initial preservation, suggesting that the creature's intelligence was actually increasing during stasis. By year 20, the changes were undeniable and deeply concerning. The creature's muscle mass had increased by 15% despite complete immobility. Bone density had improved by 23%, while neural complexity had increased by measures that challenged our understanding of brain development. Most disturbing, brain activity patterns showed increasing organization and complexity, suggesting that consciousness might be developing even during preservation. My research notes from the later years showed growing concern about the implications of what we were observing. The creature was not simply healing, it was evolving, using the preservation process to enhance capabilities that were already beyond human understanding. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the creature might emerge from preservation far more dangerous than when it had been captured. The preservation process had somehow created ideal conditions for the creature's regenerative mechanisms to operate at maximum efficiency. Without the normal stresses of consciousness, metabolism, and environmental factors, the creature's body could dedicate all available resources to improvement and enhancement. 40 years of uninterrupted regeneration had created something unprecedented in biological science. Monitoring equipment detected subtle but consistent changes in the creature's electromagnetic signature throughout the preservation period. The patterns suggested increasing neural activity and organization, as if the creature's brain was developing new capabilities during its enforced sleep. Dr. Voss and I theorized that the creature might be partially conscious, experiencing a form of extended dreaming that allowed continued mental development. The creature's cardiovascular system underwent remarkable adaptations during preservation. Heart muscle became more efficient, developing additional chambers and pathways that could support enhanced physical performance. Blood vessels developed redundant pathways and increased capacity, while the entire circulatory system optimized itself for maximum efficiency and durability. Respiratory system modifications were equally impressive. Lung capacity increased by 30% over the preservation period, while oxygen processing efficiency improved dramatically. The respiratory system developed additional air sacs and enhanced gas exchange mechanisms that would allow the creature to operate at peak performance even in low oxygen environments. The skeletal system underwent the most dramatic changes during the 40-year preservation period. Bones became progressively denser and stronger, with mineral content that exceeded anything seen in nature. Joints developed additional cartilage and lubricating mechanisms that would provide enhanced mobility and durability. The entire skeletal structure reinforced itself against potential damage while maintaining flexibility and range of motion. Muscular development continued throughout preservation despite complete immobility. Muscle fibers became more densely packed and efficient, while connective tissues strengthened to support enhanced performance. The creature's muscular system was systematically upgrading itself during preservation, preparing for physical demands that would exceed its original capabilities. The creature's sensory systems also showed remarkable enhancement during preservation. Neural pathways associated with sight, hearing, smell, and touch developed additional connections and processing capabilities. Brain scans suggested that the creature's sensory acuity was improving dramatically, creating perception abilities that would far exceed its original specifications. Most disturbing were the changes in brain structure associated with memory and emotional processing. Neural networks in these areas showed increasing complexity and organization throughout the preservation period, suggesting that the creature was not only maintaining consciousness during preservation, but was actively processing and organizing its experiences. The implications were terrifying. The creature might be spending 40 years in conscious imprisonment, building rage and planning revenge. Temperature regulation systems within the creature's body showed remarkable adaptation during preservation. The creature developed enhanced mechanisms for maintaining optimal body temperature in extreme conditions, with improved circulation and metabolic control that would allow survival in environments that would be fatal to other species. The creature's immune system underwent significant enhancement during preservation. White blood cell production increased, while the immune response became more sophisticated and efficient. The creature's body was developing resistance to diseases and toxins that would affect other species, creating a biological defense system that was virtually impenetrable. Digestive system modifications allowed for more efficient nutrient processing and energy storage. The creature's metabolism became more efficient while maintaining the ability to process a wider variety of food sources. These adaptations would allow the creature to survive in environments where other species would starve. Dr. Voss and I documented every change meticulously, creating the most comprehensive study of biological enhancement ever conducted. However, the implications of our findings became increasingly disturbing as the years progressed. The creature in preservation was no longer the same being that had been captured in 1983. It was becoming something far more dangerous. The preservation chamber's monitoring systems detected increasing electromagnetic activity in the creature's brain during the final years of preservation. The patterns suggested complex thought processes and emotional states that indicated full consciousness despite the creature's immobile state. The creature was aware of its imprisonment and was using the time to prepare for eventual freedom. Temperature fluctuations in the preservation chamber became more frequent during the final months, as if the creature's enhanced metabolism was beginning to overcome the cryogenic systems. The facility's automated systems compensated for these changes, but the data suggested that the creature's biological processes were becoming too powerful for indefinite preservation. My final research notes, written shortly before that terrible day in March 2023, expressed deep concern about the creature's continued development. The being in preservation was no longer the same creature that had been captured 40 years earlier. 4 decades of enhancement had created something with capabilities that exceeded anything in the natural world, and the implications for what might happen if the creature ever awakened were terrifying. On March 15, 2023, a severe thunderstorm struck the Montana wilderness where my facility was located. Lightning strikes caused power fluctuations throughout the electrical grid, and despite multiple backup systems, a temporary malfunction occurred in the cryogenic preservation systems. The fluctuation lasted only 17 seconds, but it was enough to cause a temperature rise of 3 degrees in the preservation chamber, a seemingly insignificant change that would prove catastrophic for everyone in the facility. I was conducting routine maintenance checks on the preservation systems with Dr. Voss when the temperature increase triggered metabolic processes that had been building pressure for 40 years. The creature's enhanced healing mechanisms, which had been operating at minimal levels throughout preservation, suddenly accelerated as the body began to respond to the environmental change. Neural activity spiked dramatically as consciousness returned after 4 decades of enforced imprisonment. The creature's eyes suddenly opened, and those eyes, which had been closed for 40 years, immediately locked onto my position with unmistakable intelligence and rage that had been building for decades of conscious imprisonment. I saw recognition in those eyes. It knew exactly who I was and what I had done to it. The creature's awakening was not gradual or disoriented as might be expected after such prolonged unconsciousness. Instead, it was immediate and explosive, as if the creature had been planning this moment for 40 years. The intelligence behind those eyes was ancient and furious, focused entirely on revenge against the humans who had stolen 4 decades of its life. My first instinct was to reach for the emergency sedation controls, but the creature's movements were faster than anything I had anticipated. 40 years of enhanced reflexes and coordination made the creature's responses superhuman in their speed and precision. The preservation chamber, designed to contain a sedated specimen, shattered like glass as the creature burst free with a roar that shook the entire facility. The creature's first movements demonstrated strength that had been enhanced far beyond its original capabilities. The reinforced walls of the preservation chamber, designed to withstand tremendous internal pressure, cracked and buckled under the force of the creature's emergence. Metal supports that were rated to hold several tons bent and twisted as if they were made of paper. Dr. Voss's screams echoed through the corridors as the creature's massive hands closed around her throat. The killing was swift but brutal, demonstrating crushing power that could snap human bones like twigs. The creature's rage was focused and intelligent, targeting the humans responsible for its imprisonment with calculated violence that showed sophisticated understanding of cause and effect. I carefully looked as the creature's enhanced capabilities were immediately apparent in how it moved through the facility. Its coordination was perfect despite 40 years of immobility. Its strength was beyond anything documented during the original capture, and its intelligence was evident in how it systematically began to hunt down every human in the complex. The facility's other researchers, drawn by the commotion and Dr. Voss's screams, arrived to find her broken body and a creature that moved with predatory grace despite having been motionless for 4 decades. The creature's attacks were systematic and efficient, using its enhanced strength to tear through the research team with savage precision that left no doubt about its intentions. Dr. James Morrison, the facility's senior researcher, attempted to activate the emergency containment protocols, but the creature's intelligence allowed it to anticipate and counter human responses. It destroyed the control panels with precise strikes that demonstrated understanding of the facility's systems, preventing any attempt to re-establish containment or call for outside assistance. Research assistant Maria Santos attempted to hide in a storage room, but the creature's enhanced senses allowed it to track her location with ease. Her death was particularly brutal, as the creature seemed to take pleasure in demonstrating its enhanced capabilities on someone who had been involved in maintaining its imprisonment for the past 5 years. The creature's rampage through the facility was methodical and thorough. It moved from room to room with purpose, seeking out every human presence while systematically destroying research equipment and documentation. The enhanced healing that had occurred during preservation had not only repaired old wounds, but had strengthened the creature beyond its original capabilities. I had managed to reach the communications room when the creature awakened, and the facility's security cameras allowed me to witness the systematic execution of my research team. What I saw would haunt me for the rest of my life, however long that might be. The security footage showed the creature's methodical approach to killing each researcher. It didn't simply attack, it studied each victim first, as if recognizing their individual roles in its imprisonment. Dr. Morrison's death was particularly disturbing, as the creature seemed to remember him from earlier years and took extra time to ensure his suffering before delivering the final blow. I watched in horror as the creature demonstrated intelligence that exceeded all our previous observations. It systematically destroyed research equipment in a specific order, targeting the most critical systems first to prevent any possibility of recontainment. The creature's actions showed detailed understanding of the facility's operations and a sophisticated plan for ensuring its permanent freedom. The creature's enhanced physical capabilities were terrifying to witness. It moved through the facility with impossible speed and coordination, its enhanced senses allowing it to track the location of every human despite their attempts to hide. The 40 years of preservation had created something that was no longer bound by normal biological limitations. Most disturbing was the creature's obvious pleasure in its revenge. The security cameras captured expressions of satisfaction as it eliminated each researcher, as if it was finally balancing the scales for 40 years of imprisonment and experimentation. The creature's intelligence was evident in how it saved certain individuals for last, creating a hierarchy of revenge based on their level of involvement in its captivity. I managed to escape the initial massacre by triggering the facility's emergency lockdown protocols. The blast doors sealed sections of the facility, temporarily containing the creature, while I fled through emergency exits that led to the surface through a network of concealed tunnels. But even as I ran, I could hear the sound of tearing metal as the creature systematically dismantled every barrier between itself and freedom. The creature's response to the lockdown demonstrated intelligence that exceeded all our previous observations. Rather than becoming trapped or confused, it systematically began to tear through the blast doors using strength that made the reinforced barriers meaningless. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the facility as the creature methodically dismantled every obstacle between itself and freedom. The emergency exits, designed to be used only in case of catastrophic facility failure, were torn open from the inside with such force that the reinforced concrete surrounding them cracked and crumbled. The creature's escape was not a panicked flight, but calculated destruction of everything connected to its imprisonment. I reached the nearest communication station 18 hours later, my clothes torn and my face marked by terror that would never fully fade. My emergency call brought a response team of military contractors and wildlife specialists equipped with heavy tranquilizers and containment equipment designed for the most dangerous specimens known to science. The response team, led by Colonel Rebecca Hayes, arrived at the facility expecting to find a contained situation that could be managed with standard protocols for dangerous animal recovery. What they discovered was a scene of systematic destruction that defied explanation and challenged everything they understood about animal behavior and capability. The facility had been torn apart from the inside, with research equipment destroyed and human remains scattered throughout the corridors in patterns that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than random violence. The creature had not simply killed, it had made a statement about the consequences of imprisonment and experimentation on intelligent beings. The preservation chamber was completely destroyed, with fragments of reinforced materials scattered across multiple rooms. The force required to cause such destruction exceeded anything in the team's experience, suggesting capabilities that went far beyond normal animal strength. The pattern of destruction showed intelligence and purpose that was more disturbing than simple animal rage. 7 researchers had been killed in the creature's rampage, their bodies showing evidence of violence that went far beyond simple animal attack. The creature had targeted humans specifically, ignoring equipment except when it interfered with its objectives of eliminating everyone responsible for its imprisonment. Most disturbing was the evidence of the creature's enhanced capabilities captured by the facility's security systems. Footage showed movements that were faster and more coordinated than any known primate, combined with strength that allowed it to tear through reinforced barriers designed to contain the most dangerous specimens. 40 years of preservation had created something far more dangerous than what had originally been captured. The creature was nowhere to be found when the response team arrived. Emergency exits had been torn open from the inside, and massive footprints led away from the facility into the dense Montana wilderness. The tracks showed a stride length that indicated the creature was moving with purpose and speed that would make tracking extremely difficult even under ideal conditions. The facility's research data, accumulated over 4 decades of study, had been systematically destroyed. Computer systems were smashed beyond recovery, paper documents were shredded, and biological samples were contaminated beyond any possibility of analysis. The creature had ensured that no evidence of its captivity or the research conducted on it would survive. The incident was classified at the highest levels, and the facility was quietly shut down. Official reports attributed the deaths to equipment malfunction and structural collapse, avoiding any mention of the creature that had caused the destruction. The truth was too dangerous to reveal. Somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, an enhanced Sasquatch with 40 years of accumulated rage was now free. The creature that emerged from preservation was not the same being that I had captured in 1983. It was something far more dangerous, enhanced by suffering and driven by a rage that had been building for 4 decades. The combination of enhanced physical capabilities and sophisticated intelligence made it a threat unlike anything the scientific community had ever encountered. Somewhere in the endless Montana wilderness, the creature continues its existence, free after 40 years of imprisonment, but forever changed by the experience. The being that awakened carries with it the memory of 4 decades of violation and the enhanced capabilities to ensure that such treatment will never be inflicted on it again. The security footage from that terrible day serves as the only evidence of what happens when science crosses the line from research into torture and the consequences of underestimating the intelligence and memory of creatures we don't fully understand.
That was Harry. No way, dude.
I'm a hunter, and I stumbled upon a baby Bigfoot in the middle of a forest and decided to kidnap it, which turned out to be the worst decision I've ever made. Within hours, a massive Bigfoot came to me to reclaim his child with brutal force, and what he did to me is the most cruel thing I've ever experienced. The timber stood dense and unforgiving as I moved through the understory. Our hunting party had been moving up and down for nearly 3 hours. I paused near a cluster of Douglas fir to check my GPS coordinates when I detected movement roughly 60 yards upslope. The clearing opened before us like a wound in the forest. Ronan emerged from the tree line and immediately recognized what lay ahead. He was examining the ground near the center of the clearing when he stopped abruptly and raised his hand. I moved to join him and saw immediately what had caused the reaction. A child entity lay partially concealed beneath disturbed vegetation approximately 20 feet ahead. It matched the characteristics of a Sasquatch. It measured approximately 3.5 feet in length, with proportions that suggested it was not fully mature. The body was covered in coarse hair, ranging from dark brown to reddish brown, with lighter coloration on the chest and inner limbs. Visible injuries were extensive. I identified lacerations on the entity's left shoulder and upper arm, consistent with the claw marks observed on the surrounding trees. Blood matted the fur around these wounds, and the entity's breathing was rapid and shallow, indicating pain or distress. Additional injuries were visible on the entity's legs and torso, suggesting it had been subjected to multiple impacts or strikes. As we stared at the broken body, did any of us stop to wonder what was powerful enough to leave a monster in this condition? The site showed evidence of violent disturbance on a scale that defied easy explanation. Soil displacement was widespread and chaotic. Large sections of ground had been torn up, exposing root systems and subsoil in patterns that suggested extreme force applied rapidly. Blood was present throughout the clearing. I identified it on rocks near the center of the disturbed area, on tree trunks at the clearing's edge, and splattered across ground vegetation in patterns consistent with arterial spray. The volume suggested significant trauma, and the distribution indicated movement during or immediately after injury occurred. The quantity of blood was staggering, but as I looked closer, I realized, was all of it coming from the child? Ethan moved to examine the trees at the clearing's perimeter. He called out his findings in a voice that carried an edge of disbelief. Claw marks and impact damage were visible on multiple trunks, occurring at heights that exceeded human reach by a significant margin. The deepest gouges were approximately 9 feet above ground level, carved into the wood. I approached the marks and placed my hand against one of the gouges for scale. My fingers fit easily within the depression, but the spacing between individual claw marks suggested a hand or paw significantly larger than my own. Then the baby Bigfoot emitted high-pitched vocalizations as we approached. The sounds were clearly distress calls, rising and falling in pitch with a frequency that suggested acute pain or fear. I had heard similar vocalizations from injured wildlife, but the tonal quality was different, more complex, with variations that seemed almost linguistic in structure. No adult entities were visible within the clearing or at its perimeter. I conducted a systematic scan of the tree line, looking for movement or any indication of observation. The forest remained still and silent, but I could not shake the sensation that we were being watched from concealed positions. Is silence in a forest a sign of peace, or the collective intake of breath before a strike? I made the decision to approach the entity directly. Every protocol I had learned regarding wildlife encounters argued against physical contact with an unknown species, particularly one that was injured and distressed. But the severity of the juvenile's injuries and the absence of any adult entities suggested that leaving it in place would result in its death, either from trauma or from whatever had attacked it returning to finish what it had started. I knelt beside the juvenile entity and extended my hand slowly, speaking in low, calm tones, despite having no expectation that the creature would understand human speech. The juvenile's eyes tracked my movement, and the distress vocalizations decreased slightly in volume, though they did not cease entirely. The moment I made physical contact with the entity, the forest erupted with sound. Movement exploded from multiple positions within the surrounding timber. I heard heavy bipedal locomotion from at least 3 directions, the sounds distinct and coordinated. The movement pattern suggested repositioning rather than immediate approach. Whatever was out there was adjusting position to maintain observation while remaining concealed within forest cover. Distant vocalizations followed seconds later. The calls were deeper and more powerful than those we had heard during our approach, resonating through the clearing with enough force that I felt them in my chest. The vocalizations originated from multiple directions, creating an acoustic envelope that surrounded the clearing entirely. The baby Bigfoot responded immediately to these calls, its distress vocalizations increasing in both volume and frequency. I recognized the pattern as a response behavior. It was calling back to what I now understood were adult members of its group, likely family units responding to the distress of their young. It was a family reunion, but would the parents see us as the child's saviors or its kidnappers? Ronan moved to my position and helped lift the baby Bigfoot. The creature was heavier than its size suggested, weighing approximately 60 to 70 pounds, despite its relatively small stature. It struggled briefly, but lacked the strength to resist effectively, its injuries limiting its range of motion. I made the decision to remove the Sasquatch from the clearing immediately. Remaining in place with adult entities clearly present in the surrounding forest was tactically untenable. We needed to establish distance and reassess our situation from a more defensible position. We moved downslope, retracing our approach route, but deviating slightly to the west to take advantage of more open terrain. I carried the baby Bigfoot while Ronan took point, with Malik and Ethan maintaining rear security. The auditory signals continued throughout our transit. Vocalizations tracked our movement with precision, adjusting in direction and distance as we changed course. I noted that the calls maintained consistent spacing. The entities producing them were moving parallel to our route, matching our pace without closing distance. The baby Bigfoot continued to vocalize periodically during transit, though its calls grew weaker as we descended. I could feel the creature's breathing becoming more labored, and I increased our pace despite the difficult terrain. Whatever injuries the baby had sustained were serious, and without medical intervention, its survival was uncertain. If the child died in our arms, would the giants in the trees still let us walk out of the woods? I established the temporary camp with tactical efficiency born from years of backcountry experience. The ridge position offered advantages that were critical given our circumstances. Visibility downslope extended roughly 200 yards before the terrain dropped away into dense timber, while the upslope approach was steep enough to slow any advance and provide audible warning through disturbed vegetation. The decision to forego fire was immediate and non-negotiable. Fire would provide warmth and psychological comfort, but it would also broadcast our exact position. Every decision from this point forward needed to prioritize security over comfort. We sat in the freezing dark to hide our presence, but could we hide the scent of fresh blood? The baby Bigfoot was placed on a ground pad near the center of our defensive perimeter. I examined its injuries more thoroughly now that we had relative safety and better light. The lacerations on the shoulder and upper arm were deep, penetrating through the fur and into the muscle tissue beneath. The wounds showed signs of clotting, but the juvenile had lost significant blood, and infection was a serious concern. Malik used supplies from his pack to clean and dress the wounds as best he could. The juvenile tolerated the treatment with surprising docility, its distress vocalizations reduced to occasional whimpers. The creature was calm, but was it because it was healing, or because it knew its real family was already inside the camp's perimeter? Darkness fell rapidly once the sun dropped below the ridgeline, and with it came a profound change in the acoustic environment around us. The low-frequency vocalizations resumed shortly after full darkness. I had been expecting them, but the proximity was startling. The first call originated from a position I estimated at no more than 100 yards upslope, well within the timberline we had been monitoring. The call was deep and resonant, carrying a tonal quality that seemed designed to travel long distances while remaining difficult to pinpoint precisely. A second call answered from the west, roughly the same distance, but at a different elevation. Then a third from the east, and a fourth from downslope. Within minutes, our camp was surrounded by vocalizations coming from multiple compass directions, each distinct in pitch and tone, but clearly coordinated in timing and structure. I recognized the pattern immediately. We were being encircled. The baby Bigfoot exhibited increased agitation concurrent with the escalation in surrounding activity. Its vocalizations increased in frequency and volume, and I observed it attempting to rise despite its injuries. Malik moved to restrain the creature gently, speaking in low, soothing tones that seemed to have some calming effect despite the language barrier. Audible wood knocks began approximately 1 hour after the vocalizations started. The sounds were distinct and deliberate, the sharp crack of wood striking wood with significant force. The knocks came in sequences, often 3 or 4 in rapid succession, followed by answering knocks from different directions. Then the rocks appeared. I discovered the first one during a perimeter check at approximately 12:30. A stone roughly the size of a softball had been placed at the edge of our camp, positioned carefully on a flat section of ground where it would be easily visible. The placement was deliberate. The rock had not rolled or fallen into position, but had been set there intentionally. If the creature was close enough to leave a gift, why hadn't it taken the child or our lives already? Ronan identified 2 more rocks within the next 15 minutes, both positioned at different points along our perimeter. Each stone was similar in size and had been placed with the same careful deliberation. The rocks formed a pattern that roughly mirrored the camp's defensive perimeter, as if marking or defining the boundary of the human's territory. I understood the implications immediately. The entities surrounding us were demonstrating their ability to approach the camp undetected, to move within feet of our positions without being seen or heard. The rocks were a message, a demonstration of capability, and a warning that our defensive perimeter was permeable. The psychological impact was significant. I observed increased tension in all group members, their movements becoming more cautious, and their responses to ambient sound more pronounced. The knowledge that something large and intelligent could approach within arm's reach without detection eroded the sense of security our positioning had provided. The baby Bigfoot's agitation reached a peak around 1 in the morning. Its vocalizations became almost continuous, and it struggled against Malik's restraining hands with renewed strength despite its injuries. Was the infant fighting to get away from us, or was it trying to warn us? I made the decision to initiate withdrawal approximately 1 hour before dawn. The sky was beginning to show the first hints of gray light on the eastern horizon, enough to suggest that visibility would improve within the next 30 to 40 minutes. Remaining in position through another day was not viable. Our supplies were limited, and the baby Bigfoot required medical attention beyond our capability to provide. The plan was straightforward. We would move downslope toward the logging road where we had left our vehicle, a distance of approximately 2.5 miles through terrain we had traversed the previous day. The route would take us through dense timber for the first mile, then into more open ground as we descended toward the road. Speed and stealth would be prioritized over caution. We needed to create distance from our current position before the entities surrounding us could react and reposition. We were betting our lives on the truck, but what if the truck was no longer a vehicle, but a monument to our failure? Ronan took point again, with me carrying the baby Bigfoot and Malik and Ethan maintaining rear security. We moved out at first light, abandoning most of our camping equipment to reduce weight and increase mobility. Each of us carried only essential gear: weapons, water, basic medical supplies, and navigation equipment. The response was immediate and absolute. All auditory activity ceased the moment we began moving. The vocalizations that had surrounded us throughout the night stopped instantly, as if a switch had been thrown. The wood knocks fell silent. The silence was deafening, but was it a sign of retreat or the quiet focus of a predator beginning its sprint? The entities that had been monitoring us were now repositioning, moving to intercept or follow without revealing their locations through sound. We covered the first half-mile in 20 minutes, moving as quickly as the terrain and the burden of the baby Sasquatch allowed. The juvenile had fallen silent as well, its eyes wide and alert as if sensing the tension in its carriers. The timber began to thin as we descended, and visibility improved incrementally. I caught glimpses of the logging road through gaps in the vegetation ahead, the pale strip of gravel visible perhaps 300 yards distant. Relief began to edge into my awareness. We were going to make it. The road represented safety, but in the wild, isn't a road just a clear line of sight for something that can run 40 miles per hour? Visual contact with our vehicle was established at approximately 6:40 in the morning. I saw the dark shape of our truck through the trees, parked exactly where we had left it on the shoulder of the logging road. We were 50 yards from the vehicle when the forest exploded. The impact came from the tree line on the opposite side of the logging road. I heard the crash of something massive moving through timber at high speed, then saw a dark shape emerge from the forest cover. The entity was enormous, easily 8 feet tall and proportioned like no animal I had ever encountered. It moved with terrifying speed despite its size, covering the distance to the vehicle in seconds. The impact when it struck the truck was catastrophic. I heard the shriek of metal deforming and the explosive sound of glass shattering. The vehicle was lifted partially off the ground by the force of the collision, then slammed back down with enough violence to collapse the suspension on the driver's side. The entity struck the truck again, this time targeting the hood, and I saw the metal crumple like paper under the force of the blow. Ronan shouted something that was lost in the chaos. I saw him raising his rifle, but before he could acquire a target, the entity had moved again, circling to the far side of the vehicle and striking it from a different angle. The truck was displaced off the roadway, pushed sideways by impacts that suggested strength far beyond human capability. I tried to process what I was seeing, but my mind struggled to reconcile the entity's size, speed, and power with any known animal. This was not a bear, not a cougar, not anything that should exist in these mountains. The entity moved with purpose and intelligence, systematically destroying our vehicle with strikes that targeted critical components: the engine block, the fuel tank, the axles. It knew exactly how to break a machine, but did it know how much easier it was to break a man? Then the entity turned toward us. I saw its face clearly for the first time. The features were primate-like but massive, with a pronounced brow ridge, a flat nose, and a jaw that suggested incredible bite force. The eyes were dark and intelligent, focused on us with an intensity that communicated both rage and calculation. Blood matted the fur on its shoulder and chest, fresh injuries that matched the pattern I had observed at the clearing where we had found the baby Bigfoot. Understanding crashed over me. This was the juvenile's parent or guardian. The injuries it bore had been sustained in whatever conflict had wounded the young one. And now, seeing its offspring in the hands of humans, the entity had abandoned any caution or restraint. The entity charged. I have no memory of the impact itself. My next clear recollection was lying on my back in the middle of the logging road, my vision swimming and my ears ringing. Pain radiated from my left side, and when I tried to move, my body responded sluggishly, as if the connection between my brain and my limbs had been disrupted. I turned my head and saw Ronan lying motionless several feet away, blood running from a laceration on his forehead. Malik was on his hands and knees, vomiting onto the gravel. Ethan was furthest away, sprawled near the tree line in a position that suggested he had been thrown or had attempted to flee. We were broken, but where was the thing that had broken us? The baby Bigfoot was gone. I saw tracks in the soft earth at the road's edge, large bipedal prints leading back into the forest, with smaller prints alongside them. The adult had retrieved its young and withdrawn, leaving us broken and scattered on the logging road. The objective was gone, but why did the air still feel heavy with the weight of 1,000 eyes? The entity that had destroyed our vehicle was visible at the forest edge, approximately 100 yards distant. I observed it clearly now, without the chaos of combat obscuring my vision. The creature stood fully upright, its posture erect, and its attention focused entirely on us. The baby Bigfoot was visible beside the adult, partially concealed behind its guardian's massive frame. The young one appeared alert despite its injuries, and I noted that it was watching us with the same intense focus as its protector. Was the child looking at us with gratitude, or was it pointing out the survivors to its parents? I understood our situation with absolute clarity. The vehicle was destroyed, we were miles from the nearest occupied structure, and at least one of us required immediate medical attention that we could not provide in the field. Our only option was to move on foot toward the main highway, a distance of approximately 8 miles through terrain that varied from logging roads to dense forest. The adult Sasquatch at the forest edge represented a complication I could not fully assess. Its behavior suggested protective aggression rather than predatory intent. It had retrieved its juvenile and withdrawn, rather than pressing an attack against incapacitated humans. But its injuries and the presence of its wounded offspring created variables that made prediction impossible. Injured animals were unpredictable, and I had no framework for understanding how an injured Sasquatch might behave. I made the decision to relocate immediately. Malik helped Ethan to his feet, while Ronan gathered what salvageable equipment remained scattered around the impact site. I conducted one final assessment of our resources: 3 functional rifles, limited ammunition, basic first aid supplies, water for perhaps 12 hours, and no communication capability. It was inadequate for our situation, but it was what we had. We had guns, but as I looked at the crushed engine block of the truck, did I really believe a bullet would do anything but make the monster angrier? We began moving downslope at approximately 7:15 in the morning. Our pace was slow, limited by Ethan's condition and the cumulative effects of injury and fatigue on all of us. The adult entity began pursuit within minutes of our departure. Movement in the tree line paralleled the logging road, keeping pace with our progress but maintaining distance. It was not attempting concealment. I could see its dark shape moving through the timber, visible in gaps between trees as it tracked us. The pursuit pattern was deliberate and controlled. The entity maintained a consistent distance of approximately 70 to 100 yards, adjusting its position to match our pace and direction. Secondary movement became evident as we continued downslope. I identified at least 2 additional entities moving through the forest on the opposite side of the logging road. These individuals were less visible, maintaining deeper cover and revealing themselves only through sound and occasional glimpses of movement. The coordination suggested communication and tactical awareness. We were being herded or controlled through positioning rather than direct confrontation. We had covered approximately 1 mile when the first rock was thrown. I heard the whistle of displaced air before the impact, then the sharp crack of stone striking stone as a rock the size of a grapefruit struck the logging road 15 feet ahead of our position. The throw had come from the tree line to our right, launched with enough force to cover the distance and strike with significant velocity. The projectile was a warning, but how many warnings would we get before the rocks started finding their targets? A second rock followed within seconds, this one landing closer, perhaps 10 feet from Malik's position. Ronan called out a warning as a third rock arced through the air, passing directly over us and landing on the opposite side of the road. I increased our pace despite the risk to Ethan's condition. Remaining in the kill zone of an entity that could throw rocks with that kind of force and accuracy was tactically untenable. The logging road began to descend more steeply as we progressed, the grade increasing to perhaps 15 degrees. Visibility improved incrementally, but so did our exposure. Is there any place more dangerous for a man than a line of sight owned by a monster? The pursuing Sasquatch adjusted its tactics in response to the changing terrain. I observed it moving closer, reducing the distance to perhaps 50 yards as the tree cover thinned. Its size was even more apparent in the improved visibility. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with a body mass I estimated at 600 pounds or more. Its movements remained fluid despite its injuries, suggesting physical capability far beyond what its wounds should have allowed. Terrain manipulation began approximately 30 minutes into the pursuit. I heard the crash of a falling tree behind us, then saw a large Douglas fir toppling across the logging road perhaps 200 yards back. The tree had not fallen naturally. It had been pushed or pulled down deliberately, blocking the route behind us and eliminating any possibility of retreat. A second tree fell minutes later, this one closer and positioned to narrow the corridor of our advance. Multiple Sasquatch were channeling our movement, forcing us along a specific route through selective blocking of alternative paths. Malik reported that Ethan's condition was deteriorating. The head trauma was causing increasing disorientation, and his responses to questions were becoming delayed and confused. We needed to reach medical care within hours, not days, or the injury could result in permanent damage or death. The clock was ticking for Ethan, but would the forest let us out before his time ran out? I made the decision to abandon the logging road and cut cross-country toward the main highway. The route would be more difficult and take us through denser cover, but it would also be more direct and might allow us to break contact with our pursuers. I led the group off the road and into a ravine that descended sharply toward a creek drainage visible below. The pursuing Sasquatch responded immediately to the change in direction. Vocalizations intensified, and I heard multiple sources moving rapidly through the timber to reposition. The Bigfoot that had been paralleling our movement on the logging road appeared on the ridge above us as it tracked our descent into the ravine. I led the group downward as quickly as safety allowed, using trees and exposed roots for handholds as we descended. A rock struck Ronan in the upper back as we navigated a particularly steep section. The impact drove him forward, and he lost his footing, sliding several feet down the slope before catching himself against a tree trunk. The throw had come from above, launched by the Bigfoot on the ridge with enough force to cause significant bruising despite Ronan's heavy jacket. I realized with cold certainty that the entities were escalating. The throws were no longer warning shots or demonstrations. They were targeting us directly with intent to injure or disable. The pursuit had transitioned from monitoring to active engagement. We were now in a war of attrition, but how do you win a fight against an enemy that uses the mountain itself as a weapon? More rocks followed in rapid succession. I heard them whistling through the air, striking trees and ground around our position with impacts that sent up sprays of dirt and bark. One stone struck a tree trunk inches from Malik's head, the impact loud enough to make my ears ring. Another hit the ground between my feet, the force of the strike sufficient to embed the rock several inches into the soft earth. We reached the creek at the bottom of the ravine and splashed across without pausing. The water was shallow but fast-moving, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. I led them up the opposite bank and into a section of younger timber that offered some concealment but limited visibility. Ethan collapsed as we crested the bank. Malik called out urgently, and I turned to see him lying motionless on the ground, his eyes closed and his breathing shallow. The combination of head trauma, physical exertion, and stress had overwhelmed his body's ability to compensate. I raised my rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The report echoed through the ravine, sharp and unmistakable. The entity on the ridge paused, the rock still held, but not thrown. For several seconds, human and creature regarded each other across the distance, each assessing the other's intent and capability. The entity lowered the rock slowly and stepped back from the ridge edge, disappearing from view. I heard movement in the timber around us, the other pursuing entities withdrawing, their vocalizations fading as they increased distance. The gunshot had altered the dynamic, introducing a variable the entities apparently chose not to test further. We reached the shoulder of the road at approximately 11:30 in the morning, nearly 30 hours after we had entered the forest on what should have been a routine hunting expedition. A logging truck stopped within minutes of our arrival at the roadside, the driver's expression shifting from curiosity to alarm as he assessed our condition. The forest kept its secrets, and I kept mine. Both parties, I believed, were better served by that arrangement than by any alternative I could imagine. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.